In accordance with Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, be advised that notice of this special meeting was made by posting on the bulletin board in Town Hall and mailing to the officially designated newspapers that this special meeting would take place on Wednesday, March 31st, 2021 at 7:30 p.m. via the Zoom platform. Due to the COVID-19 virus and mandatory quarantines imposed under the executive orders by Governor Phil Murphy, Millburn Town Hall is closed to the public for purposes of this board meeting. The notice was given containing information necessary for members of the public to attend the meeting through the Zoom platform, both by audio and/or video means. Entrance to this meeting was also provided on the agenda for tonight's meeting. The public will have the same opportunity to participate at the appropriate time virtually, just as if they were attending an in-person meeting. This notice was posted on the Millburn Township website, Town Hall Bulletin Board, and Town Hall front door, as well as forwarded to the Item, Star Ledger, and Star Ledger, which publications are the official newspapers for the Township of Millburn. Roll call.
Daniel Bear,
Here.
Gaston Halpert,
Here.
Jorge Mastro Pietro,
Yes, here.
Mark Matzel,
Here.
Maggie Miggins,
Here.
Joseph Steinberg,
He's
Here.
Sanjeev Vinayak, David Morrow,
Here.
Srini Vijay. Did we lose him?
He was here.
He was here. What happened now? Hold on.
Oh, he's in the guest attendee list.
Okay, he's
Hi, folks. Sorry, I got booted out.
Chairwoman Jim Salerno,
Here.
Chairwoman Betzel.
Here. Thank you. Okay. And if you're not speaking, if we can ask you to mute just to make sure we don't have any feedback issues. Thank you. So our first, before we get to our application, we just have a little bit of administrative. First, we're going to approve or review the minutes of February 3rd meeting, which were distributed. Did any members have any comments been received, Eileen, by you regarding the February 3rd minutes?
I did not receive any.
Okay, great. Did anybody have any further comments or questions regarding February 3rd minutes? Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the minutes of February 3rd?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
Second from Jorge. Great.
Hold on 1 second,
Just make sure you can.
because I don't have, no, I have him on that meeting. 1 second.
Okay.
I don't believe you were, I don't have you on the roll, and I don't have you on the,
Jorge was
Yeah.
not.
It wasn't?
That might have been the one you missed. I will go ahead and make a second on that.
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes of February 3rd?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed?
I don't believe I was there either, right? So.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll abstain as well as Jorge for that one. Okay, thank you. So meeting minutes from February 3rd, 2021 passed. And we have 3 memorializations tonight. We'll begin with 20012 Beehive Properties, which we received both the draft memorialization as well as the black-lined revised with consolidated comments on the from our council. Did anybody have any further comments or clarifications on application 20012? Okay. Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve this memorialization?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you. Eileen, you'll take a vote.
Daniel Bear,
Yes.
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Mark Matzel,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Beth Zoll.
Yes. And that, just to confirm, Eileen, those were the yes votes for the application. Great, thank you. Okay, so application 20012, Beehive Properties, approved. We'll move on to application 20011, Advanced Accelerator Applications. Also we received both a first round, I believe, Ed, and a black line as well on Advanced Accelerator. Ed, you are muted. Sorry. I did ask you to do that. My fault.
Yes, you did, but that's all right. Yes, this one's a little different than the other two. The first one where I gave you black lines and the last one. In this one, the applicant made certain changes in the resolution or proposed changes in the resolution. Eileen sent those to me. I guess they were sent to her and then she forwarded them to me. Since they weren't comments or requests made by board members or the professionals from the board, what I did was I took the black line version that the applicant had provided. Now, these were not my comments or any board members. And I just made certain comments or commented on each of their revisions. So if everyone has those, we can go through them. There aren't that many, but the point is the board's going to have to decide whether they want to accept the comments and changes individually or reject them or modify them in some other way. If there's an easier way to do it, I'm happy to do that. If the board looked at all of them and said, we agree with what your recommendations are, that's fine. I don't want to short circuit anything if we need the discussion on it. So, Madam Chair, I don't know how you want to proceed.
I will look to board members if anybody feels that they would like to go through it and has not had the opportunity to review the version that Ed circulated on the 29th. We can step through those. If nobody feels uncomfortable and we can proceed, then we will do so. I'm not seeing anybody.
There were not that many changes, very few.
Correct. Yeah.
So maybe I could do this. Many of them I accepted. They were formatting changes, typos, rephrasing words, sentences that were probably better. But there were a couple where I recommended that the board not accept the changes. So maybe I should go through those.
Okay.
Okay. And the first one is on page 7, if anyone has it. And this relates to the fencing around the turnaround area. And what they added, the sentence read before, in addition, as a result of public comments at the February 17, 2021 hearing, the applicant agrees to install the same 7-foot-high privacy fence in an L shape along the north edge of the proposed truck turnaround area, and then running north to the edge of the existing rain garden on lot 85. The sentence ended there. The applicant proposed to add the following to that sentence: or in such other shape and area as the neighbors and the applicant may agree to be substantially similar to the presented plan, if and only if said fence is approved by the NJDEP. My recommendation to the board was to reject that addition because it's the board that makes these decisions. It's not the applicant and the neighbors who decide here's where the fence is going to go. And if it doesn't go in accordance with the plans, then so long as the applicant and the neighbors agree, the board is really out of it. I'm not suggesting that the board would necessarily disagree with that, but I just don't think we should delegate the board's responsibility to the applicant and the neighbors. So that's the first, the question is whether the board wants to accept that comment or accept that change or reject it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Why don't we pause there and you know, kind of, I look to the board if anybody wants to speak up. I do appreciate that suggestion. I think that is appropriate to not leave it to the neighbors, which, you know, may be a not consensus. I don't think that is I think that's a little bit too open-ended. So I agree with your recommendation. Anybody feel otherwise?
I second that.
Okay. Okay, so Paul, I'm sorry, Ed, if we were to not incorporate that language, does that mean the applicant is opposed to us moving forward on this? I guess I just want to
No,
understand.
I think we would vote on it the way it is, and if they don't like it the way it is, then they have their remedies.
Okay, understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Um,
Mark, go ahead. Mark Matzel.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I just had another question, and you could say no, but and I'm doing this from my iPhone, so I can't see any markups, but it's numbers 9. Let me see. No, I guess it's number. No, I lost it now. Sorry. Oh yeah, so it's number 11, it's number 12, and it's number 13. So it says the applicant shall make all efforts to replace any current or proposed impervious area with permeable pavers or other permeable products, etc. And can I just add the words and report back to the board? Because I don't know what that means. They'll make an effort. Yeah, we made an effort, but maybe they can report back to the board and say, we made an effort and it's not feasible, or because I don't know the use of, you know, of that piece without follow-up, as well as number 12, will make reasonable efforts to enhance the rain garden presently on the premise, etc. And they added, I believe, if approved by New Jersey DEP, and it's in the new regs, so that, you know, so DEP is going to approve it. Okay, so that's fine. You can leave that as is, but it would just be nice to have follow-up, and then the installation of, you know, consideration of 2 EV charging stations. And can I just add the words and report back to the board?
Ed, is that within
Yes,
what we have?
I think the point is well made. For both 11 and 13, I think we can add that and report back to the board, or maybe we should report to the township engineer. Would that be better? And then she can pass it along.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
Martha's cringing, saying, why did I do that to her? But
I think that's appropriate.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll do that in 11. That's condition 11 and 12, 13, 11 and 13. All right, and getting back, there was only one other change that I recommended the board not accept. And this is a deletion. It relates to the construction of the fencing and the buffering in the flood hazard area. You remember that all of that is subject to DEP approval. They need to get DEP permits for that. And the way the board had left it, as I understood it, was, and I'll read the first sentence, which sets the scene. The applicant shall file all requisite permits for the construction of the fence and buffering in the flood hazard area, along with requests to stabilize the bank along the west branch of the Rollway River, along the consolidated property with the NJDEP within 60 days of the date of the approval of this resolution. I then added the following sentence, which the applicant has asked to be removed. The sentence then reads, in the event the NJDEP denies the applicant the right to construct any portion of the buffering or fencing or other improvements in the flood hazard area set forth in the plans, including but not limited to sheet C07A, the applicant shall be required to return to the planning board for amended approval and provide alternative mitigating activities and landscaping to the extent that the proposed activities are not ultimately issued a permit by the NJDEP. And I think that is what the board said. When the applicant said, it's subject to DEP approval, we all understood that. But the point was, if the DEP did not issue the permit, then the board would have to consider other alternatives to the buffering that was proposed. The applicant didn't ask that be rejected. My recommendation was to not delete that language and keep it in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So your recommendation is to leave that in still, as it allows us to still make sure that they aren't impeding on the neighbors with the lights.
Correct.
Okay. And I'm comfortable with accepting your recommendation on such. I think that's a good recommendation to not just allow them to say, well, they said no, and no, we won't do anything.
Correct.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, so with notation of those three changes to what was most recently circulated, specifically the addition of the language on 11 and 13 that Mark just discussed, accepting your recommendations on the two proposed changes from the applicant.
Right. And then there
As
were
we just discussed.
others that I accepted that were, syntax and
Yes.
formatting and that kind of thing, which I didn't have any problem with.
Great. So with the applicant or with the resolution standing as such, does anyone move to approve that? I will move to approve application 20011. We have a second.
Second.
Okay, thank you, David. Eileen, did David vote on it? Is he? You're muted, but I just want to check.
He voted in because Dan had to recuse. Gaston Halbert,
Okay,
You get it? Yes.
Jorge Mastro Pietro,
Yes.
Mark Matzel,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Joseph Steinberg,
Yes.
Sanjeev Benayak,
Yes.
David Morrow,
Yes.
Miriam Salerno,
Yes.
Beth Zoll.
yes. Great, thank you. With that, memorialization for application 20011 approved. Our final memorialization tonight, just lost that page, but I believe it's application 20014. I have that correct.
That's correct.
Great, thank you. Sorry, it just closed on my screen. I opened something else. This is for C, both the initial memorialization as well as a markup incorporating comments received. Any further questions or corrections from the board? Okay. Great. Anyone want to make a motion on this memorialization?
I'll make a motion.
To approve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
thank you, Miriam.
I second that.
Daniel Bear,
Dan, we didn't hear you.
Yes.
Okay,
Gaston Halbert,
Yes.
Jorge Mastro Pietro,
Yes.
Mark Matzel,
Yes.
Maggie Miggins,
Yes.
Joseph Steinberg, did we lose him?
we have lost Joe.
We lost Joe.
Oh, he's in the attendees list now.
So I'll skip to Sanjeev Benayak,
Yes.
Miriam Salerno,
Yes.
Beth Zoll,
Yes,
Joseph Steinberg,
only, Eileen, because this, to memorialize, we
yeah,
require, we have what,
we have,
we have the threshold of
Yes.
the requirement, right?
We're fine.
Okay, but I would hope that Joe can. Okay, up, Joe, there you are.
Yeah,
You with us?
Yes.
we need your video.
Was that a yes that he's with her or a yes on the resolution? I'm not sure.
Yes on the resolution.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, great. Let's continue moving on. We have lots to for tonight. That's it for minutes and memorializations. Now we're going to reopen application 2000785 Woodland Road. While we're doing that, I'm glad, Joe, I can see you, so we're great. Eileen, if you want to bring in, if Mr. Inglesino is here, I didn't
Beth,
see.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Thank you, Maggie, as per usual.
Yep. Thank you so much. Enjoy the evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. And before we jump too far into the application, I know Ed had asked for the opportunity to make a few clarifications regarding this application. So I'm happy to allow him to do that before we get too far into everything.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see Mr. Inglesino is here, so that's good. I wanted to clarify the record regarding the comment that was made by the applicant at the last hearing. During the course of the discussion related to rooftop decks and grills and fire pits, and then there was a whole discussion, the board will recall, regarding how the building fits into the neighborhood and the character of the neighborhood. It was led by Jorge, among others. But during the course of that colloquy, when Mr. Minnow was being asked questions by Mr. Inglesino and questions about whether Mr. Minnow understood the question, the following comment was made by the applicant's attorney, and I'll quote it because it's important to quote it. And it reads as follows, quote, this is an affordable housing and inclusionary project that was carefully designed and planned by the governing body as a settlement with the applicant. And our view legally is that our obligation, if you will, which we have, I think this hearing has borne out, has fulfilled what the settlement agreement provided for, unquote. The clarification that I wanted to put on the record was that sentence could be interpreted as saying that the governing body designed and planned this project. The governing body did not design the project. The project was designed by the applicant. It was always designed by the applicant. So if there was any implication there that somehow the governing body designed it, that's not the case. Now, that said, and I don't want to put words in Mr. Inglesino's mouth because he can speak them himself, but he did refer to the settlement agreement in there. And I think perhaps what he was saying, and it doesn't matter what he was saying or what he was not saying, I do want to bring to the attention of the board the fact that the settlement agreement to which he refers did in fact include reference to several exhibits. One of them was the ordinance that this application has proceeded under and continues to proceed under. Another one was a set of concept plans. And the concept plans were attached as Exhibit B to the settlement agreement. And there's reference to that exhibit in several sections of the settlement agreement. But one part I think is important in terms of the context in which that comment was made. And as you know, when you at these hearings, sometimes they don't run on a script. So things get mixed up in terms of topics and so forth. But anyway, the provision in the settlement agreement is in Article 5, subsection A, and it reads in part, and I'm going to read it precisely so I don't synopsize it. It reads as follows, quote, the parties acknowledge that the aesthetic appearance and appeal of the development from the adjoining streets and properties including specifically all facades, number of units, footprint, and height of the building, constitute significant areas of concern for the township and the neighborhood. Therefore, it is an essential and significant element of this agreement that any development application presented to the planning board shall be consistent with the concept plan, Exhibit B, and consistent with the ordinance, Exhibit A, except for any reasonably de minimis bulk variances or waivers from its provisions, resulting only from detailed engineering design of the residential development, provided, however, that the developer shall not seek any variances from the ordinance relative to the following: 1, use; 2, maximum density; 3, footprint of the building; 4, aggregate number of units, 62; and 5, height and stories, unquote. So the point that I want to clarify here is that the township did not design the project, but the settlement agreement incorporated as an exhibit, and I just read sort of the basis for that incorporation, incorporated the concept design that the applicant is going forth with before the board. That's really all I wanted to clarify. I just didn't want to leave the impression that the township went out and hired an architect, or the township said, here's the design for this, and handed it to the applicant and said, this is what you're going to build here. That wasn't the case at all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, not going. Good evening, Mr. Inglesino. Welcome back.
Hi, good evening, Madam Chair, and members of the board. And I don't know if you have, I have 2 witnesses tonight, Madam Chair. If somebody could let them in, Mr. Michael Tobia and also Mr. Gary Dean. I don't know if they've been admitted or not, but appreciate it.
They're on their way in right now. Thank you for calling.
That's terrific. Mr. Buzak, thank you.
Ran into traffic on the way.
Yeah, so Mr. Buzak, thank you for your comments. I don't think they are any different from my actual words, but we certainly don't want anyone to get the impression, as you said, that the township actually designed the project. I did not say that, and we certainly don't want anyone to insinuate that that is the case, but so we'll leave that as it be. Tonight, Madam Chairman, we have Gary Dean, who, as you know, testified at the last hearing, and we left off with questions for him. Mr. Steinberg had raised some questions or additional concerns with regard to pedestrian safety. We took that as a legitimate challenge for us to come back and perhaps put some more meat on that bone, as it were, because we got the sense that maybe the board felt there was a little more we could offer in that regard. So we want to be responsive to Mr. Steinberg's concern, which we got the sense was perhaps shared by the board. So Mr. Dean is back to provide some additional testimony in that regard. He will then answer questions, and and then when that's concluded, Mr. Tobia is here to provide the planning testimony. So that's what we have on tap for tonight. And Mr. Tobia finishes with questions, and who knows, maybe we can finish tonight, Madam Chair. We're certainly hoping that may be the case. So without further ado, I'd like to call Mr. Dean. Mr. Dean, first of all, you understand you're still under oath, that's correct?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
And are your credentials unchanged from the last time you testified?
Unchanged. My license continues to remain in good standing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Dean, you've done some homework from the last meeting. Is that correct?
We have, yes.
Okay. Can you please share that with the board?
I'll do my best in order to be succinct, but yet detailed at the same time. Mr. Steinberg had identified some concerns, whether they were individual or the collective consensus of the board, regarding each of the 3 proposed driveway exit points and the impact on pedestrian flow on the various sidewalks on Woodland and on Chatham, particularly as related to children. and recognizing that garage egresses and the relatively, I'll say, shallow setback from the building create some inherent concerns with regard to visibility, as opposed to, I'll say, traditional driveways without a structure surrounding them. And so I took occasion to review a number of existing locations throughout the state with which I'm familiar and have had some experience. And I wanted to contrast those with experience that the board might have in developing, I'll say, solutions to improve our exit. And you'll have to forgive me because I don't think I can share and scroll. So I may have to share and then share and then move on. What I'm about to show you is a photograph of an existing garage exit in the Harborside development in Jersey City. This particular access, if the board can hopefully see it, has 3 different garage exit points that discharge directly onto a sidewalk. And you'll see the treatment that's been provided is that through signage and the building columns, it creates a little bit of space after the exit driveway through the gates that are shown, with some signage that depicts vehicles entering and exiting.
Mr. Dean, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to mark these photographs and other items you may produce as exhibits, if you don't mind. So we'll mark this last one. My numbering system is right. We're up to A38. So that is the photograph of the garage ingress and egress at the Harborside, you said, right?
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
The second one, and I'm just going to show the board a few examples. That I don't want to belabor the point, but I understand the concern that was raised relative to the treatment and the fact now this particular exhibit that I've shown, hopefully that's visible, is a garage at 15th Street in Hoboken, next to what is known as Park and Garden. And you'll see literally the sidewalk comes out directly at the building exit that is delineated, I would characterize fairly poorly, with just a few bollards at the column separating the ingress and egress drives. Mr. Buzak, if you want to consider that our second exhibit.
Yes, we'll mark that A39 for the record.
Thank you. And then lastly, I just have another one, which is, I believe, around the corner from that site. This one is worth mentioning only because it will segue into how some ideas that I developed for the subject application. This particular driveway exit is also in Hoboken, I believe on 14th Street. But I want to draw the board's attention to, you'll see some landscaping and some masonry planters that flank each side of the garage to the right and the left, but also the use of glass, I'll say, along the side of the exit driveway. And I thought these are some ideas that I believe I started to describe at the prior hearing. That one, I think we'll call that third exhibit, Mr. Buzak.
Yeah, we'll call that A40 for the record.
Thank you. And in coming up with other ideas, I think I shared you the wrong one. My apologies. This one. I don't know what the board is seeing, but it's not the exhibit I intended to share. Are you seeing?
It says Washington Trust Bank Garage.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so it is the correct one. That particular driveway exit employed the use of what I call the truncated domes, which are the yellow devices that you will see on the exhibit that are used to provide, I'll say, a difference in the pavement treatment so that pedestrians basically feel them with their feet, but they also visually can see them. And it creates a little greater identity of the presence of the garage exit. So there's one last exhibit I'd like to share, and it's at a recent garage sidewalk interface for a project where I'm working in Passaic, New Jersey.
Previous exhibit will be marked A41, that's the Washington Trust Bank.
Thank you.
And this one will be marked A42, and you can describe it, Mr. Dean.
Certainly. And again, my screen isn't showing it, but I'm hopeful that the board is seeing a photograph of a sidewalk that appears to be under construction.
Yes.
And what I recommended to that applicant, in light of the identical concerns that were raised by Mr. Steinberg, is to use a decorative pavement course. And you'll see they're stamping it into concrete to emulate bluestone or something to that effect, where it has both a colored as well as a textured treatment to help distinguish that aspect of the driveway apron from the balance of the sidewalk. So what I developed for this particular application is a combination of improvements. And can the board see an excerpt from the site plan that I've now depicted on the screen?
Yes.
Thank
We'll mark that A43, Mr. Dean.
Thank you. This is an excerpt from Mr. Lanzafama's site plans, and this is on Chatham Road, and it shows the two driveway aprons or exits that would approach the sidewalk. And I've indicated a few notes that reinforce what I just described. In the yellow that is pointed to, I've shown truncated domes, which are those fabricated panels with the bumps on them. In between those two domes, as they approach the driveway, I've shown the decorative walking surface, and whether that's brick or whether it's stamped concrete, something durable, but to give the pedestrian a greater awareness that they're not just on a sidewalk. And then lastly, in the green, I've shown what could be employed, and again, with the board's concurrence, the use of those planters. Very low level, 2 feet, with low level plantings, seasonal, annual, what have you, that ensure that the pedestrian stays along the sidewalk. And I hope the board can see with my cursor, that is the sidewalk dimensioned at 6 feet, upon which the pedestrian would be walking. So the intent is to provide delineation for each of those driveway openings, and that to ensure that the pedestrian doesn't meander, if you will, into the individual driveways. I've also shown a few dimensions on this plan that I want to call to your attention. At the westernmost driveway, there is a setback between the back of the sidewalk and the edge of the building of 7.5 feet. At the easternmost driveway, that setback is 11 feet. And that's an important dimension because in traffic engineering, we use a 6-foot dimension to emulate the perspective of a driver once the vehicle has stopped and their ability to look left and right. These buildings and the setback that have been designed are far greater than the 3 exhibits that I showed you earlier in Hoboken and Jersey City. And with a 7.5-foot setback and 11-foot setback, I am confident that a driver exiting from the garage and stopping at the appropriate location without ever encroaching into the sidewalk will be able to safely look east and west without having any visual or visibility interference looking along the roadway. In addition, I've performed the same type of analysis, and this is a new exhibit, but again, an excerpt from the site plans.
We'll mark this A44, Mr. Dean.
Thank you. And this is the Woodland Avenue driveway, and I've shown using the same nomenclature of yellow for the truncated domes, green, unfortunately I couldn't draw them very well, but the green planters to help ensure that pedestrians remain on the sidewalk. This particular driveway has a 12.5-foot setback, so the visibility is actually better than the other 2 locations. But like the one exhibit I showed, which I think was the third photograph, I've consulted with Mr. Minnow and the applicant, and the walls, if you will, flanking that driveway entrance and exit, again, if the board feels are appropriate, can be constructed of a glass or a transparent material that would allow drivers even better visibility to ensure the safety of pedestrians walking along the sidewalk. There's also, I'll say, yet one more aspect of pedestrian safety, and I don't know that I'm going to be able to. I have a video of a product that I've consulted with Mr. Minnow, and I'm going to have to describe it. I don't believe I can show this. It is a product known as PASS, PASS signs, and that's an acronym for Pedestrian Alert Safety Signs. And this particular mechanism, and I apologize, I don't know why I can't share that. I can only describe it as a sign that is affixed to the exterior of the building. And when a vehicle approaches, it has a detection equipment that either through radar or some type of sensor will then illuminate a flashing light that indicates car exiting or car approaching, something. In this particular case, the sign reads car coming, and it flashes to catch a pedestrian's attention, but it also has an audible warning. And that is something that is commonly used at garage exits to provide an enhanced measure of safety for pedestrians who aren't necessarily paying attention because they're looking at their phones or what have you. And then finally, the last element that I discussed at the hearing, and hopefully the board can see, and I've just shown an example of a pedestrian convex mirror or a parabolic mirror that would be affixed to the garage ceiling and would provide both an exiting motorist as well as the pedestrian the ability, if you will, to look around the corner. And that is also used for garage exits.
You want to mark that?
Yes, we'll mark this A45, and I think if I might, Mr. Dean, there's a sign there, looks like an illuminated sign that says caution vehicle exiting. Is that similar to what you were testifying to a moment ago?
It is. I would submit, and again, if I could find a way to have you watch the video, I think it's very informative. But I believe it's I think it's on Mr. Minnow's plans. I'll stand corrected if that's not the case. Oh, here we are. I think I can do it. All right. Can the board see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm playing the video, and is the sign flashing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. So this is the type of warning that would be provided to a pedestrian. For the record, I will describe. All right. So you saw the vehicle exit, and then it stops.
Mhm.
I will give you the YouTube link just for identification purposes. And I hate to do this, but it is youtube.com/watch ? Small letter V as in Victor equals Y as in yellow 88 capital N small letter G 2 small letter I, small letter N, capital V, capital X, capital I. And it is entitled Parking Garage Exit Warning Signs for Sidewalks by PASS, PASS signs. Mr. Buzak, that photograph that I showed has a similar type warning device, but I actually, having reviewed the various options, feel that this last one from PASS Systems is very effective and would definitely capture someone's attention more readily. So
Mr. Dean, that could be wall mounted onto the mounted onto the building as opposed to a freestanding
correct.
sign as is depicted in the exhibit, correct?
That is correct. And I believe Mr. Minnow's plans, or at least an exhibit I saw of Mr. Minnow's plans, does in fact feature that very treatment affixed and mounted to the side as well as above. I'll leave it to the board's discretion. I know aesthetics are a significant component of this application. But those, and I'll say that is literally the bells and whistles of, I think, a very effective treatment. Not all of them need to be considered, but I would say we are certainly, and I've discussed with the applicant, amenable to incorporating any or all of those into our final plans if they're so favorably considered. So I did want to be responsive to the concerns of the board and really come up with what I think is a good combination to highlight pedestrian awareness in that particular area. And that's all I have, Mr. Inglesino, unless there's anything else.
No, Madam Chair, we send it back to you for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Inglesino. Thank you, Mr. Dean. I know, Jorge, I did see your hand raised earlier. I don't know if you had a question either that was answered or if you'd like the opportunity.
Yeah, no, my question, sorry, my microphone.
You're okay.
Oh, okay, my microphone is closer. My question is, Gary, you show us 3 pictures at the beginning, two in Jersey City, one in Hoboken. Do you think that those pictures, those situations are similar to here across the street of the Short Hill train station?
I think we actually have a better situation and the 3 exhibits that I showed in that we have a deeper setback of the building from the back edge of the sidewalk, meaning a vehicle has a greater ability in this particular instance to pull forward before ever conflicting with the sidewalk. Those other examples, you'll note that the building is set much closer to the street. So I do draw that distinction. And they were only shown for illustrative purposes, merely to indicate, that there are some good examples and some bad examples. And I think in this case, I wanted to meet the challenge posed to me and come up with a solution that I thought would be very effective and efficient and safe.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions regarding Mr. Dean's testimony from the board members right now? Gaston?
I did like the glass visibility on, I guess it's Woodland. What is preventing us from doing that on Chatham?
I don't think there's anything on the westerly driveway, and I'm going to go back to share screen. Can everyone see that?
It's loading on mine. It hasn't started yet. Not seeing. Oh, yep. It's the with the yellow and the green.
Sure. My understanding is that to the right, where we would get benefit for that glass use, that could be done. On the westernmost driveway, I believe there is a demising wall, an interior wall with some function, and I don't know the function and hopefully you can see with my cursor, and I'll do my best to describe it as the very northeast corner of that driveway exit. There's either mechanical equipment or some structural element that precludes that glass from being used in that particular location. And that's where, in lieu of that, the parabolic mirror, for example, would work. And again, the illuminated flashing warning signs would be available at both. But with a 7.5 foot setback, in my opinion, it's not needed. But we're doing everything we can to improve the visibility and add as many safety features to ensure that the pedestrians remain well away from the vehicles that are exiting.
Okay. Thank you. And another question: is there anything other than planters that you can put to kind of corral the pedestrian towards the outside of the sidewalk?
I would say the sky's the limit on that. For example, things such as decorative cast iron railing can be used. Some people like the greenery as an entrance treatment. There are a variety of planters. Some are movable, some are, they're on wheels. Some are more permanent. They can be made of brick or block at the board's preference. Or it just could be greened in general, but you will note, and hopefully you can see on my screen, there is a heavy dark line that runs parallel to Chatham Road. That is the right-of-way line. So any single one of the improvements I've shown are technically off of the site. And if they're favorably considered by the board, I suspect the process would entail approval by the township engineer and then consent of the governing body for improvements in a public right-of-way.
Yeah, and Mr. Dean, if I could just interject for a moment, I think that we will, the things that Mr. Dean has shown the board with regard to any improvements that would actually be on our property, which is the subject of the application, I think the board could, decide to grant those as condition, and we've already indicated our willingness to comply with that. With regard to improvements that are in the public right of way, I think that's a different situation legally. We can recommend, we can state to the board that the applicant would be willing to do those, provided that they're recommended by the board engineer and they're approved by the council, the governing body, as part of a developer's agreement. Because, I just think legally that's the way we would have to do it. We're willing to do it. But what we don't want is a situation where that could arise, where the board may condition the application on an improvement being made in the public right of way that the council may not agree with, and that wouldn't leave us in a good place. So we would make that distinction. But either way, we're willing to make the improvements that are being outlined by Mr. Dean.
And I will say, understanding again the aesthetics of it, are really at the discretion of the board and the community. What I've shown as planters could very easily be a grass strip, as is commonly found behind the sidewalk, if you will, and that will ensure that pedestrians remain on the 6-foot sidewalk as appropriate, in lieu of hard space directly in front of the property. But again, I just came up with a few ideas, and the objective is through whatever means, aesthetic, decorative, or functional vis-a-vis a fence, we'd certainly entertain at whatever direction the board can offer.
Thank you. No, I definitely like all of your ideas. I really appreciate them. Yeah, my concern was I have a kindergartner who's just over 36 inches. So having a planter there, I don't know how much that, that would provide protection, maybe even hinder a little more. That's why the grass is even better. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thanks. Sanjeev, I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. While you were doing this, is there also that you got a chance, or you have some pictures for us where the same buildings had their loading and unloading?
I'm not understanding the question. I'm sorry.
The same buildings that you actually showed the pictures for going in and coming out. Do you also have, by any chance, the pictures where their loading and unloading was?
I don't. I responded really where we ended at the last hearing, which was a focus on pedestrian access and the interface between.
Fair point. I was just trying my luck.
Mr. Lonzon, I'm sorry, Mr. Lonzon Fama had, and I'm looking for it. I know we had introduced an exhibit at the last hearing where a pull-off and loading area had been created along Woodland Avenue for either parcel delivery, Uber, Lyft, things of that nature.
I'm familiar with that, yes.
And that was as far as I got with it. Each building, and again, there aren't a lot of parking garages in suburban New Jersey. I know the township has a few where we have the interface with loading, and that is, as an urban circumstance, oftentimes there is a loading accommodated within the building itself. Oftentimes it's done curbside, and that, for example, on-street parking is removed, say, for example, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., specifically to allow loading and unloading. We haven't proposed that in this circumstance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks. Additional questions from members of the board for Mr. Dean? Srini, sorry, I see you now.
Hi, Mr. Dean. Just a quick question on the YouTube video that you'd shown right at the end. And I was trying to pull it up on my iPad, but I think I might have typed something wrong. And I apologize if you already addressed this, but when you showed the vehicle approaching out of the garage with the flashing lights, is that also emanating sound?
Yes,
it's the same. Okay.
And I wasn't joking. I mean, it's literally bells and whistles to alert motorists, often because, times being what they are, people are often walking down as pedestrians, face planted in their phone, and having an audible device is an important component to, I'll say, waking them up, and so that they're more aware of their circumstances as they pass in front of these garages. So I don't have the specifics on things such as the decibel levels, but I'm sure that is a setting that can be controlled to ensure that they're not overwhelming and out of character with the neighborhood.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dean.
You're welcome.
I see Miriam.
Hi, just a quick follow-up question to that. Is there a feature, do those pass signs have a feature that gives the motorist an audible alert if there's a pedestrian in the area, or is it only for the pedestrian to hear?
It's only for the pedestrian. The challenge is the type of sensitivity that would be required, and I think we covered this at the last hearing. It would be subject to so many false triggers every time, for example, the wind blows, if a cat crosses by, and anything silly like that, it would constantly be going off. And I think that would defeat the purpose of providing that warning. To compensate for that, one of the reasons we have a deeper setback of the building, but where we can, I've recommended the use of the glass panels so that motorists can have a broader visual angle, but also the use of the parabolic mirror. And I don't know if I showed the board a detail of something like that. They're not complicated. Let me see if I showed you this. Did I show this particular picture?
You did, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So that gets installed on the ceiling so that a motorist who's exiting literally can see around the building, but it also works for the pedestrian to be able to see if vehicles are approaching as well. So any one of these mechanisms or all are available. And I'll leave it to the board, in your consideration. If you don't like one, hopefully I've provided enough of an array where there are other options that serve the same purpose.
Great, thank you. Paul Phillips, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Beth. Gary, I wasn't available for the previous special meeting when you testified. So did you cover parking, or will you be covering parking?
I believe I did, with one caveat, and I know Mr. Tobia has information as to an interim condition as the project is phased, but my recollection, Paul, is yes, I covered it, but that we're complying. If there's a specific question, I'd be happy to address that.
Okay, so it sounds, Gary, like Michael will cover it. We're specifically, I would like to have the applicant address the insufficient parking for the existing medical office space during the phase 1 construction. to just let the board know how that's either going to be mitigated or addressed. So if it's coming from Michael later, that's fine. But I did not want it to not be addressed.
Certainly. I'll ask Mr. Tobia to shake his head, just that he will be
Yes,
covering it.
I
Thank
can,
you.
I can represent that Mr. Tobia will be addressing that question.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Other questions regarding Mr. Dean's testimony tonight? Okay. Great. Then we will turn to the public at this time for any questions that anybody may have specifically to Mr. Dean. So we're just asking questions of Mr. Dean right now. And I see some people are doing, and I apologize, I didn't pause at the beginning of the application, so I will for now, just to remind you of the method that it's going to happen. So people use the raise hand function, which is hopefully in the bottom of your screen or somewhere along the Zoom screen. We will call you in individually. Please say your name and address for the record, and then ask your questions of Mr. Dean. And again, to reiterate, if you just have comments or want to ask another professional, that's not what this time is intended for. So that said, questions for Mr. Dean, it looks like, I see there's two hands raised. Tim Callahan. Oh, a few more have popped up. Okay, and I see you too, but we'll just go one at a time. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, okay, great, there you are. You coming in?
I brought over, where did she go?
Oh, Susan Blackburn.
Blackburn.
Okay, so Susan, yeah, you're with us. Just unmute yourself and then name and address, please.
Sorry, I look like I'm in a cave. I tried my best. Susan Blackburn, 11 Inwood Road. I don't live in a cave. I have two questions about the garage because I'm very, even though I live closer to Woodland Road, I'm very, very concerned about the egress on Chatham Road. The first question is, how tall were the buildings in the examples that Mr. Dean showed us? Because we have no idea, are they the same height? Are those garages the same height as the garages that they're going to be building on Chatham and Woodland? Are the buildings the same height, or are they taller since they're in Hoboken and Jersey City?
Right. They're taller buildings, but insofar as the interface between the vehicle garage and the sidewalk, other than the setback, which is much greater on both Chatham and Woodland and those other examples, I would say it's a standard garage exit over an apron onto the adjacent public street. So the overall height of the building, I don't know is particularly relevant.
Well,
insofar as
do you know how many stories those buildings were?
No, I no.
You don't know, so you only showed us one story. You didn't show us what the buildings look like or what kind of pedestrians we could be expecting walking by the buildings.
I think in the examples that I showed, given that they are in a little different environment, that the pedestrian activity is substantially higher in the examples that I showed than what I would expect along either Chatham or Woodland. So
but you can't really say. You're talking about Jersey City, and you're talking about places where people are expecting pedestrians to be behind their cars.
I was asked to evaluate ways we could further enhance safety for our design, and that was the charge I met. I don't have an opinion as to the
I just thought maybe we could have some idea of the mass of the buildings and the garages. You mentioned that there were 4 driveways. Are they all going to have exits to garages, or are they just 4? Are some of them going to be entrances only, or are you going to have 4 driveways there that people have to go in reverse to get out of?
No, there are 3, just so we're clear. I don't recall my testimony. I believe the site presently has 5, if not 6 driveways. So part of this application.
Does it?
It does.
No, it's you go in and go out in the same way. It doesn't have, it has one driveway.
If I could be allowed to finish, the subject property has at least 5 two-way driveways comprising the site. There are 3 on Chatham and 2 on Woodland, and each one of those is a
Mr.
two-way
Dean, if I could
driveway.
just clarify, you mean existing condition today?
Existing
Thank you.
conditions, correct. In the proposed conditions, we would be down to 3. Each one of them would carry two-way traffic.
Oh, because of the former gas stations, you mean?
Correct.
Okay. The other question is, when you talked about bells and whistles, I don't really, do you mean that if they're not going to be motion detectors, are they going to be like the mats that the car drives over and then a sound goes off?
It is an actuation device. I apologize. I don't know the specifics of it. It could be as simple as a motion sensor that would use in a driveway if you have a long driveway, something that would detect the vehicular motion. And as that vehicle approaches the exit, the lights would flash and an audible warning to pedestrians. I think it says caution vehicle exiting, something to that ilk.
Oh, okay.
Would alert the pedestrians so that everyone understands something's about to happen. And between improving the visibility and having a greater building setback, even though I don't think these treatments are necessary, I think in light of the concern expressed by the board, we wanted to be proactive and add as many enhancements to ensure safety as possible. So that's what
Can
we.
you just, again, I think I just kind of forgot about the gas stations, and most of the time the people go out going straight. They don't back out into Chatham Road. I mean, I've lived here like 25, maybe more years, but at least 25 years. So I remember when both of these sites had gas stations. Very, very, very rarely did a car back out onto Chatham Road, and certainly not onto Woodland Road that I can recall. I've never seen a car backing out of the driveway to the Summit Medical Group ever.
And I just want to make sure you're getting to the question part.
So I don't understand. Well, I just need to understand how many of these how many are going to be garages where people are coming out of garages, and how many of the driveways that are proposed are going to have people backing out of driveways, because we're kind of used to the people exiting the Summit Medical Group. And believe me, we hop away from a lot of the people going in and out now. We're always hopping when we're on Chatham and Woodland Road. But
if I could
would
respond,
just like to know, how many cars do you think are going to be actually be backing out? How many of these driveways require a car to back out of the driveway?
The answer is 0. There will be no cars backing out of any driveways. All driveways are two-way, and they allow a car to exit facing the street and sidewalk.
Okay, thank you. You know, I didn't understand that at your presentation, so I found it very, kind of alarming. I apologize if I got too hyper about it. The only other thing I wanted to ask about the attachment, and I'm not sure if it's allowed or not, but garbage cans. I know it's like a very simple thing, but we have a lot of dog walkers here. We're going to have a lot of people going outside the building.
Mrs. Blackburn, I just want to make sure that we keep your questions, because those are some questions that have been kind of addressed to other professionals in the past few hearings on this application. But
Has this come up?
Garbage disposal and waste disposal? Absolutely.
Yes. Not waste disposal, but the garbage cans for pedestrians coming, like you're coming out of the building and you're finishing.
They've talked about how they're going to handle waste management and the plan. Yes, and I don't mean to cut you off. It's just it has been.
I know. I understand. I'm definitely taking up a lot of time, and I'm very thank you for permitting it. It's more like I would like to have some garbage cans there, even though my poor puppy is gone now. It's nice when there's a place where you can walk by and we used to have that in that park, in that little park by the Summit Medical Group. And we
Oh,
don't
I
have
understand.
it
I
anymore.
think you're talking about things in the public right of way, like
Correct,
trash
correct.
cans. Okay,
Yes.
I understand. Okay, I don't think Mr. Dean would be able to answer that.
Well, that would be a great thing.
Okay,
I
thank
think.
you. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you very much.
All right, next, whoever Eileen is next on yours, I don't want to crisscross if your list looks different than mine. Okay, it looks like Phoebe, you have come in, so welcome. If you want to, again, for the record, state your name and address and turn your camera
Yes.
on if you can.
Oh, let's see my camera. Yes, thank you.
There we go.
Yeah, sorry about the glare here, but anyway, you're not missing anything. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm Beatrix Shear, 101 Oakview Terrace, right next to the first, well, my neighbor across the street and I are the first houses next to the building. And so I am a little concerned about the bells and whistles. Can you describe how loud they're going to be? I'm particularly concerned at nighttime. I know they can be adjusted. I don't know that they will be adjusted. I mean, the fact that they can be is not necessarily, I'd like a commitment that they will be adjusted, especially at night. I mean, if it's going to be a siren, that's not so good.
I fully understand, which is why in my testimony, I offered the caveat that these are options that we're presenting for the board's consideration. They do come with certain concerns, just like you expressed. I would not advocate something that is in any way disruptive to the neighborhood or community. I will say that the way the signs are placed and relative to your particular location, that the building itself acts like the biggest sound barrier you could possibly have, so that the sound will emanate onto the sidewalk. We can certainly work with the manufacturer. There are options. We could have no sound at night. And we can certainly commit to that to ensure that it's not intrusive into the
Right.
neighborhood.
I mean, I guess I think it's great to have safety features and necessary, most important for children, and there are not as many children likely to be walking on those sidewalks at night. So I mean, I would like that, if that's going to be written into the plans, I would like something. I mean, I'm wondering if something about the noise level, especially at night, out of concern for the community, and the type of noise. Do you know what I mean? If it's something too alarming is, I mean, we hear trains go by, things like that, but you know, an objectionable alarming noise, it would be nice if that were not included.
Understood. Just if I could explain, and that's why I had to go through that whole what the YouTube link is. The sound that emanates is actually a human voice. It's a recorded voice that indicates, you know, car exiting or car approaching, something of that nature. So it's not like a doorbell or a buzzer or something to that effect. I regret saying bells and whistles now, but it is an audio warning to approaching motorists. So if the sound of a voice is offensive, you know, again, we can certainly work with the board to come up with something that meets the objective of providing better awareness.
And now, as you say, there would be there is a proposed divot in the road. Wouldn't that have a negative effect on safety of the pedestrians? It's going to be right into the sidewalk. Wouldn't that have a negative effect on the safety of pedestrians?
I'm not sure what you mean by divot. The design that we've proposed is actually, and I'm remiss in not distinguishing it, all of the examples that I cited at those other garage locations.
No, this is for the move in, move out, the hundreds of deliveries every day. This is this little divot that is supposedly going to accommodate all of the move in, move out trucks, all of the delivery trucks. I would like, however, it does come into the sidewalk. So wouldn't that be Of course, there's a curb around it, but wouldn't that detract from the safety, especially of children walking down that sidewalk? They're gonna have to move to the left on that sidewalk.
The sidewalk would wrap around that indent, if you will.
And there's room for that?
Yes, there is. And it's shown on Mr. Lanzafama's plans.
Okay, so how many, so I have a question, another question about that. I don't know, what do you want to call it? A divot, we were calling it a divot. If you have another name for it, do you have another indentation for the hundreds of deliveries? How many deliveries a day as a traffic engineer? I'd like to ask you, how many deliveries a day would come to 62 apartment units, most of them 2-bedroom units? So they're not just single.
With all respect, that question has been asked and answered by.
Oh, what was the answer? I missed it.
By another witness.
Okay, well, what I did not get the answer. What? And the answer was? I don't believe it was asked and answered. And the answer was?
I think we received a response, and I appreciate you asking the question. I think the board has received the response, and whether I know it was not a specific number, because I think the response was something to the effect of one is not able to predict that. But I do agree that
how about an estimate? I'm not asking for an exact number. What you mean traffic experts do not know?
Well, in any case,
a number for deleveries per day by number of residences?
Ms. Sheard, whoa. Ms. Sheard, please. Thank you.
Mr. Inglesino, if you're able to respond to the question of how this question.
Yes, that is not a question that this expert is qualified to answer. It was not part of his testimony.
Oh, okay. I don't know who, if not a traffic engineer, would answer that. Okay, because it's about traffic. All right. So, all right, what about move in, move out? Do you have an estimated number of those?
Again,
you've got 62 units and the Summit Medical Group.
Again, Madam Chair, this was asked and answered and testified to by Mr. Lanzafama, and this is not a traffic. This is not within this expert's area.
Right, Ms. Chair, I believe, and I understand you're asking a question that has to do with traffic. There's the traffic associated with the use of the building, and there's a traffic associated with the ingress and egress. And I think we've heard testimony about both of those, but these are I believe the questions that you've asked just now have been the types and the specific questions we've asked Mr. Lanzafama and gotten his response. But
can you tell me what the response was? What was the response? We don't know.
If I may. This question was asked by me, and Mr. Dean has actually responded in the last meeting.
Thank you.
It was a question from traffic. I'm not saying he should answer or not answer, but he was the one who actually gave the answer of this question.
Right, thank you. And I know we have discussed the deliveries with multiple of our witnesses, but thank you.
Right.
Well, that's disappointing that I can't get an answer. But anyway, where will the ambulances that are coming to the Summit Medical Group go? There, the divot that was recommended was on the residential side, on the Woodland Road side, not on the Chatham Road side. So my question is, how will the ambulances be accommodated on Chatham Road?
So again, it's not my job to answer, but I know we have heard testimony regarding what the expected use of the Summit Medical, which was, I believe the expert's testimony was that there would not be anticipated ambulances coming. So I don't know. I don't know that the
necessarily not like a hospital emergency room, but I live right there. I see ambulances coming to the Summit Medical Group now. They pull up on Woodland Road or they go into the parking lot. I'm talking about those large vehicles. I'm not talking about an emergency room type situation where they're coming up. They do occasionally come, honestly. I mean, I know I live there. They occasionally come with lights flashing And that's because someone's ill at the Summit Medical Group and they have to take someone to the hospital.
I
But
understand.
that happens. So I can't see how this isn't traffic. Where will the ambulances be, how will the ambulance be accommodated when they come? They're large.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think these questions, first of all, are not related to the testimony given by provided by this witness. These are questions really that relate to the operations of the site, which have been testified to. Mr. Dean is the traffic expert and has testified to that effect. So questions with regard to his testimony within his area of expertise are certainly welcomed. This is a series of questions, respectfully, that really have to do with how the site functions, which are not within the purview of Mr. Dean and have been previously testified to.
You know, that is just not true. Of course, this is about traffic. The ambulances are traffic on the street. And when Mr. Lonzo, I'm just going to finish. When Mr.
Just ask your question. I'm going to ask Mr. Inglesino to allow the witness to answer the question if the witness can answer the question. If the witness is unable to answer the question, then the witness can just say, I can't answer that question, but nothing should be derived from that for the objections that Mr. Inglesino made. Mr. Dean may not be the right person to be asking it. So the fact that he cannot answer it does not implicate his credibility. It's just a response to the question that you asked. So Ms. Sheard, why don't you ask your question, Mr. Inglesino, please allow your witness to answer the question if he can, and if he can't, he could just say that and we can move on. Ms. Sheard can get her questions asked. Let's not get into comments. Let's just ask the question. So Ms. Sheard, why don't you go on, if that's all right with the chair?
Please.
Thank you.
How will the ambulance traffic be accommodated on Chatham Road?
Mr. Dean,
Mr.
for Mr.
Inglesino,
Buzak's
can you allow Mr.
instruction,
Dean to respond?
I would ask you to answer. I don't know whether do you understand the question in terms of traffic, because there'd be one ambulance at a time, I would presume.
Maybe or maybe not. Why would you say that? That's not my question. Maybe there's more than one coming at a time.
I don't, Mr. Dean.
Mr. Inglesino, if we could just, let's let Mr. Dean respond to the question asked.
My understanding is that the building is designed to be accessible for emergency vehicles.
And so you're assuming they would go into the parking garage?
They can.
They would be able, this is very important. They would be able to go into the parking garage. That's your understanding?
Correct. They could also stay on Chatham Road. They could stay on Woodland Road. It's an emergency vehicle. So,
well, it wouldn't necessarily be coming in an emergency. It might be coming to pick up someone. You know, ambulances are used in a lot of ways. There's also other medical assistance vehicles that are large vehicles. Access, whatever, you know, the access transport or things like that for, you know, you have a medical facility here. And so there are going to be some people arriving in specialized large medical vehicles. So can those go into the garage?
my understanding is yes. I did not testify to that this evening.
Yeah, Mr. Dean, please, if you can answer the question with testimony, please do so.
I
If you
think
can't
the
answer the
lawyer,
question, if I may, if you cannot answer the question with testimony,
he's trying to influence his
don't answer.
expert there. Okay, I'll move on. I'll move on. We have an answer. One second.
And Ms. Chair, we do at this point.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
and I'm so very sorry. I'm very sorry. One other question. I have another question to ask you about your calculations about the increase in traffic due to the building. Now, you told us that in figuring that out, you accounted for the lack of traffic coming from the gas stations that you believed had been functioning there. What part, my question is, what part of your calculation had to do with accounting for the reduced traffic because of the gas station that was closed.
I don't understand the question at all.
Okay, I'm sorry to make it longer. How did you determine, what factors did you, if we need to go back and lay a foundation, okay. What factors did you use to determine whether traffic would increase on Woodland Road with the new construction?
Sure. The gas station is obviously closed. It did generate traffic.
Stop. Now, when do you believe
Ms.
it?
Sheard, Sheard, please,
Okay,
let
all right,
Mr.
take
Dean,
over. Go ahead.
no, Ms. Sheard, please, you have to be fair. You ask the question, you need to let the witness answer. If you have a follow-up question, you can ask the follow-up question.
Okay, all right, I'll listen. So
Do is interrupt the witness in the middle of his testimony. Let him finish. When he's finished, you can follow up. Mr. Dean, please proceed.
Certainly, thank you. As I was explaining, I recognize that the service station is closed. I also recognize that the small medical office building adjacent to it is either closed or under occupied, as is the medical office building to the west on Chatham Road. So I look at it from what potential traffic can be generated in as much as the property is developed for these uses that have had a history of use. Now, I understand there will be more traffic than there will be there today. That was taken into consideration in the traffic study.
okay, so you said that the medical office next to the gas station is underutilized now. Is that correct? So it's right now, it's not generating as much traffic as a normal 10,000 square feet of medical space, correct?
Objection
No,
to the,
is that-
objection
No,
to
that's
the
not true.
question of underutilized.
Okay, what did you say about that building, that it was, you said it was under occupied? I could have sworn I heard that.
Objection as to relevance. I don't understand. What the.
Oh,
Again,
may I respond to the relevance? May I respond why it's relevant?
Okay,
I think
may I just speak, please, as the chair? So again, we are the planning board and we're evaluating this application. We are not a court of law. There is not cross-examination. We are not judges in that sense. I do not have a law degree. So, you know, the objections, I understand where they're coming from. That Phoebe, you absolutely deserve your fair opportunity to ask questions, as do all the other members of the public who are waiting. And you deserve to get an answer to those. I think we're all trying to get to the same result. Let's just please focus on the question, the answer, and less of the accusations or between the lines, if that's possible, just to keep us all moving, you know, with as much decorum as we can.
Yeah, I was just responding to his objection. I don't think he should be able to make it. You're right. This is not a court of law. He shouldn't be making his objections.
Okay, so please.
But
feel
okay, so my
free to ask.
question, let me repeat my question. You just said that the medical space, that it's the current Summit Medical Group office is next to the closed gas station, is under occupied now, correct?
No.
Oh, I could have sworn you, which ones were under occupied that you said?
Number 58, Chatham Road,
Right,
and 60, nope, is it 57? '87 Woodland.
oh, you're talking about the building that is unoccupied, not the medical group. Is that correct?
I just described two different buildings that aren't Summit Medical Group.
Okay, so now did you figure in, when you were figuring in the amount of increased traffic, did you figure in that that amount of increase in traffic would decrease by the lack of traffic from the building that's not occupied on Woodland Road?
That was my testimony, is that the change in use to replace those with 62 apartments in total would generate less traffic than has historically occurred on this property.
Okay, now suppose I told you, suppose it were true, and in fact it is true, that gas station has been closed for at least 15 years. So you mean you can't, when you're figuring a change in traffic, you go back and look at what the traffic was when a gas station was open 15 years ago, that's been closed for 15 years?
So
I look at a change in use and what that does to potential traffic generation.
Thank you, I've got that. And how far back to the change in use? How many years back do you go? If
Because
a gas
this,
station has been closed for 15 years,
sure.
why are you looking at that? Or how isn't it incorrect to call to account for, oh, we won't be using that gas station that we haven't used for 15 years. That won't generate traffic. Isn't that incorrect?
It's not incorrect when comparing what is an existing land use. It's there. It hasn't been demolished. Maybe it has by now. It hasn't, it's there. There are rights that run with that property, and there is a history of use impacting that neighborhood. Whether it was yesterday or 15 years ago is irrelevant to a traffic engineer.
I see. So your change in use is nothing. It's not about change in current use. It's a change in use dependent on some factors that have existed in the past. And we cannot rely on that change in use as a change in current use. Correct?
Just so you're clear, the record and the board, the traffic study that was done assumed that those uses don't exist. They assume that the traffic generated by the subject proposal is entirely new, when in fact it would be appropriate for a traffic engineer to, I'll say, provide a credit against the traffic from the current uses developed on the site.
Okay. Okay. Now you did testify about parking. I want to ask you how much of the parking in the parking garage is allocated to guests at the building? No, I'm not talking about medical group patrons now. I'm talking about guests of the residents of the building.
Sure. 1/2 space per unit, or 31 spaces.
And how much is allotted to Summit Medical Group patients?
Well, the entire practice, 10,000 square feet, patients and employees require 67 parking spaces.
So those are just the, so are those things the legally required numbers?
Those are the spaces required by ordinance, so I'll say yes.
Okay, so where will the excess, where do you anticipate the excess cars coming to the building will park?
There's no
Yes.
If I could finish, there's no premise of excess parking. The plan complies with the zoning requirements for parking. And in fact, we have 2 extra spaces above what is required.
Okay, and you're saying that the garages can accommodate the larger vehicles than just cars?
I'm going to have to defer to either Mr. Minow or that was previously covered as to the accessibility and specific architectural design of that structure.
So if the deliveries, say the Amazon, whatever, other deliveries, the food deliveries, whatever, if that divot isn't built, or if the divot is occupied when they get there, where will those delivery trucks park?
They'll go to their next stop in the neighborhood and come back.
Okay, we'll count on that. Okay, thank you. I have no more questions on about the traffic.
Okay. Yeah, Eileen, you can bring in the next member of the public. Jean Pasternak, you should be in, and you can unmute yourself and.
Hi there. Thank you very much. Jean Pasternak, 342 Hobart Avenue.
And Jean, I apologize. You're a bit soft for me. If I can just ask you to speak up.
Okay. I'm trying to see if there's a way I can make myself louder. Okay. I will ask my questions, Mr. Dean. In the research you did for your testimony regarding the safety elements or enhancements that you suggested, when you were doing that research, and of course the samples that you provided, Did any of them have a school within blocks of the driveways that you showed us, or in any other of the research samples that you might have looked at?
Yes,
Any of the ones that we saw today?
yes.
Which one was that?
Hoboken,
And how far away was the elementary school?
it's 1 block away.
So in that sample of the Hoboken, you're saying there was an elementary school within 1 block.
Less than 1 block, it's across the street. Yes.
Oh, it's across the street. Okay, so would the students and faculty and so forth be traversing those driveways that you showed us, or would they be across the street?
They would traverse the driveways.
So if the school's across the street, they're going to be crossing the street and walking across those driveways? I'm kind of confused by that.
Correct.
Why would they be doing that?
If they happen to live further to the east, they would need to walk across that garage entrance to go home.
So where would the school be? Directly across from those driveways? Is that what you're saying? They would be straight across and people would cross in the middle of a block or whatever, right?
People
Didn't look
walk
that way.
Sure. People walk down the sidewalk, they walk across the garage entrances, they cross at the intersection, and they go into park and garden.
Mhm. Okay, well, it didn't appear in the visuals that you shared with us that sort of occurrence would be, at least from the visual standpoint. I would also like to ask, in terms of the enhancements that you suggested, when I looked at the visuals that you shared with us, Hoboken, Jersey City, I have to say, I guess the Jersey City is the second most populated city in the state, and I guess Hoboken's about 1.5 times the size of our town. The scale just didn't look appropriate in terms of trying to visualize those types of things in a small area like we're talking about at that particular spot that this development is going into. Did you choose those examples for a reason? I mean, could you find something that was sort of more the scale of what we're talking about in that neighborhood? It seemed like these are metropolitan areas and we're talking about little old Glenwood.
I chose them because I happen to know of those locations and projects, not for anything specific other than I literally using Google Street View drove around different neighborhoods where I happen to know there are parking garages. And it was to identify the type of treatment that is customarily used at garages for safety. And I think given the urban environment and the substantially higher pedestrian activity, I wanted to contrast what I think is the relative absence of any such measures that we've proposed in this application. So I would concur it's a different environment, but I would concur that I would submit that because of it, we could equally do the same treatment and still have a safe access design. But the board presented me with a challenge to devise some suggestions to make it safer and better. And by way of example, that is what I presented to this board. These are nothing more than suggestions that if the board happens to concur, will be incorporated into the final plan.
I totally appreciate the challenge that you were offering. I guess in the end, it kind of demonstrates in an ironic way, what many of us feel is the inappropriateness of the size, the density, the use and the footprint of this development in that spot. So I'm sure you didn't intend that, but those pictures and what you described seems way overkill for our little neighborhood where there are children going to school at Glenwood. Anyway, that's just my response to what you just said. The other thing I'd like to ask is on the with regard to the past examples, I am concerned about the decibels and the noise. We don't have anything like that anywhere near this area of this development. So what's that going to sound like, feel like, going all day long, 24 hours a day, people coming in and out? I mean, hopefully it won't be too much at night, but how do we know? You can't restrict what people are doing any time of the day, how they live.
think-
how is that going to affect the neighborhood in terms of the noise?
Sure. I would liken it to the same activity you find in your own neighborhood, and that is occasionally a neighbor may leave at night, but by and large, once people are home for the evening, they stay home for the evening. And that the fear or concern of there being a constant flow of in and out traffic like one might have at a commercial parking garage is not even a relevant or fair comparison. This is a residential parking structure accommodating 123 parking spaces. So it's not likely to be very busy or intrusive. What we've suggested is a way to address the board's concern. If the overriding concern of the neighbors is the noise element, that can be eliminated from the proposal. We're deferring to the board's judgment and to that of the community. So there's no set answer. We're presenting options for your consideration. So
No, absolutely appreciate that. But at the same time, while we're also concerned about things like noise, we are very concerned about safety, given that someone was killed there, a year plus ago, and that we have small children traversing that area regularly, at least several times a day. So I think that they're not even equal. Safety is obviously number one, but the noise and the being out of character for that area. And I would have to argue with you. I mean, I've been going to the Summit Medical Group at 85 Woodland for 25 years, and I can tell you that there is plenty of traffic going in and out of there. It's hard to find a place to park often. There are different practices that have expanded there, and I believe that that's not really true, what you're saying, based on my experience. And I know it's just one person, but I've been here a long time, and I've seen the growth of that group, and I've seen the traffic, and I've had trouble getting in and out of there, finding a place to park, et cetera. So I'm pretty sure the patients and the clients of Summit Medical will be using those drive areas. So I do think that it is an issue. I do appreciate your creativity and you're trying to find solutions, but I also think it's important that we look at how appropriate all of this is to that neighborhood.
Thank you. And Jean, did you have any other questions for Mr. Dean? I just want to make sure.
I'm finished now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, the next questioner looks like somebody named Popster 2222. If you could just state your name and address for us. You want to unmute yourself. So whoever's named Popster, you should now be in the panelist mode with us. And if you could unmute yourself, you can ask your question for Mr. Dean. Here we go. Okay, you're still muted, so we'll just get you unmuted and then.
Okay.
Welcome.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Peter, last name is Pop, 45 Woodland Road. I live, gosh, I guess not even an eighth of a mile down the road from the Dog's Leg that goes around to come down Woodland Road. Thank you. It's been very interesting. And with all respect, I think everyone has been, there's a lot of passion here from what I hear. And I know in myself, living here for 32 years, and my God, this is a little hamlet. We live in a place that's not very much like any other place that I've been to recently. That's as close as we are to this megalopolis of New York. But I think that kind of in my own mind, maybe others, it makes it even seem more precious. The question comes to my mind about, no, not the fire pits and the party pits at the top of the buildings, whatever that may be. Sounds like the Borgata in Atlantic City in some ways, but that's great. That's fine. I'm not going to worry about that. But what I do worry about is the amount of how are trucks. We're building a big building. There's girders, there's steel, there's 18-wheelers that are going to have to deliver these girders and steel. They can't come under the trestles. because nothing basically fits under the trestles other than a small box truck. So what roads are they going to come up? I can only think of Baltus Roll, which is logical. But then when I think of Woodland, Woodland has that aforementioned dog leg.
Mr.
Well, you-
Papa, and I apologize for interjecting. I just want to make sure we understand, is your question, how will
Yes.
construction vehicles access the site during construction?
Yes, and I'm sorry for being so long.
No, I just want to paraphrase to make sure we get the question. Okay.
That's the main thrust of it. But if I may, just as a quick question addendum, you know, it's a very bucolic little area, okay? And I guess I feel very protective of it because I love it so much. But I can see how the encroachment of a large building will just change it forever. And I guess maybe change is not as easy to take for some people as others.
And Mr. Dean, are you able to respond to that?
I didn't hear a question from me, so I don't have a way to respond. I'm sorry.
Okay, Mr. Inglesino, will we have an expert who can testify to the access of construction vehicles to the site?
Well, I mean, construction and so forth is covered, frankly, in the developer's agreement. Mr. Tobia is going to provide some testimony with regard to phasing and what will be done at each phase and so forth, as well as the parking associated with that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Pop, I know that was likely not the full extent of the response you were hoping.
No,
but
it didn't answer even my question. I'm just wondering, logistically speaking, how these have to be large pieces of steel are going to be brought in when they can't even get under the trestles to come from Route 78 and 24. In other words, there's only one or two ways to come down, which is 20 Woodland Road and Baltus Roll. And that means we're going to have large construction vehicles going up and down Baltus Roll and Woodland, I guess for a month, if I'd be an optimist. And if two cars can't get down the same road at the same time, how do we do that with very large construction vehicles, cement mixers? You know, the ones that slowly turn the barrel and it goes down and belches smoke and diesel fuel and everything else. I mean,
Mr. Pop, excuse me, Mr. Pop. I think I understand your concern. That issue, that is how construction actually takes place and the route that trucks are able to take and not able to take, those are not within the purview of the planning board. And I understand they're a concern for you, and I'm sure there's a concern for the neighbors as well. But that's not within the planning board's purview in terms of establishing the manner in which any project that are before them or that is before them is actually constructed. That's in the purview of others, as usually the township engineer, the township police department, the DPW, and so forth, because those logistics are things that do need to get worked out, but this planning board is not the one that works them out. So to the extent there has not been testimony, it's not a deficiency of the applicant. It's just that those kinds of things the planning board does not deal with under the land.
Very well put, sir. And I understand exactly, and I agree with what you're saying. But is there someone that's looking at this now and taking this into account?
The town, if this application is approved, the township engineer and the other township staff, people, professionals will deal with all of those, and it will be done typically in pre-construction meetings. It may be done in part in a developer's agreement, but those things are things that the township deals with on a regular basis whenever there's construction that's going on in the town, and they are concerned about that, and they develop the best routes and alternatives that are available. That doesn't mean to say there won't be an impact on you or your neighbors or the neighborhood or certain streets. There likely will. That's just common sense. But that is dealt with by the township staff and professionals.
Understood.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do any other members of the public have questions at this time regarding Mr. Dean's testimony? Okay, I see, looks like one more hand up. Couple more. Okay. Good evening, Carolyn Rendell. Hi, Carolyn. If you're able to hear us, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So
Could I just ask you, I'm sorry, could I just ask you to say your name and address just for the
Carolyn Rendell, 308 Taylor Road South in Short Hills. Mr. Dean and the board, I know you know that I can't understate my fear and our fear for the safety of our kids. I have 4 kids. And as you know, Mr. Dean, not only is there the Glenwood School at the end of the street, but cars coming across the train station to go to the high school from one side of town, from the high school to go to the middle school to the other side of town, and of course the Washington School. So in the mornings and in the afternoons, you know, non-COVID times, there are cars not only lined up all the way down Chatham to go into Glenwood, but cars lined down Hobart to get under the tracks, cars coming the other way, and kids walking and biking past where that building is going to be. My kids bike there in the afternoons, in the mornings to school. They bike there in the afternoons. They run by there in the evenings, playing, catching fireflies. So I've got to tell you, those mirrors and the signs you've proposed and the sounds could not be big enough or loud enough from my perspective. We need all of those. The planters, I understand the comment from the board that maybe the planters would block the sight of small kids, but I don't really understand that grass would be helpful, because for my kids, grass is an invitation to walk on. So they don't just walk on the sidewalks. So I would say plants, planters, metal rods, signs, whatever you can put there. You know, I've had many near misses there even before any construction starts. I can tell you, cars coming off of Woodland while we're driving down Chatham, I've had to stop on my brakes. I've seen kids had to jump out of the way of cars. So I just can't imagine what this is going to be like. My understanding was that a traffic study was done in July, which of course wouldn't take into account school traffic or much commuting traffic. And I'm hopeful that a study was done after that, you know, and pre-COVID, although I don't know that was the case. My question is, in addition to the mirrors, the sign, the potential sounds, the planters, has there been consideration of the applicant paying for crossing guards specifically dedicated to those 2 driveway accesses on Chatham and to the driveway on Woodland during the morning commute and school hours and during the afternoons when the kids are coming in and out of the different schools and to their activities? Because I can tell you the crossing guards make a huge difference on the streets by the schools, and they can, you know, alert drivers and kids to cars that they may not otherwise notice. Is that something you've considered?
Thank you, Mr. Rendell. On this one, I am going to direct the witness not to testify or to provide an answer. That is not something that the applicant will be doing. Certainly, the township can, or the school, or whoever can provide crossing guards if they want to, but that's not something that could legally be imposed upon the applicant.
Sorry, I understand it maybe can't be legally imposed. I asked if the applicant would consider it.
No, the applicant will not be providing for crossing guards at that location.
Okay. And when, I was going to say if, but when, because it's only a matter of time, a child or an elderly person or an adult is hit by a car, whether they're walking or on their bike at that site, is that when you would consider that? Is that when you'll consider a crossing guard?
Ms. Rendell, the witness is Mr. Dean. You asked a question with regard to the applicant. The applicant's attorney represented that this
Directed him not to
cannot
answer.
be done. Okay, so now I think you need to direct any questions you have to Mr. Dean, if you have any of Mr. Dean.
That was my only question. I wanted to.
And you will have the
to express
opportunity. You will have the opportunity later, as will everybody else who's at the meeting, to make comments and voice your opinion about anything related to this application. But now we're just limited to questions of Mr. Dean and the testimony that Mr. Dean has provided. And your initial question related to that. So if you have any more, please ask Mr. Dean.
That is my question, and I guess I wanted to reiterate, or as some of the board said, that I think all of those precautions, the mirrors, the sound, the signs, the planters, the all are things that absolutely should be put in place. And I was just asking if there could be something additional, but I understand that the attorney has answered that question, and it is no. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one other question from the public. Hi there, Steph, you should be joining us again if you can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just have a quick question.
Sorry, Steph, if you could just say your name and address for us.
Yes, Stephanie Eller, 177 Hobart Avenue. When I'm looking at these photographs of Jersey City and Hoboken and sort of picturing how it's going to be in our neighborhood, I'm just curious, from my time living in those spaces, those minors, that foot traffic, those children are usually accompanied by nannies or adults. Whereas as a Glenwood parent, I think most parents let their children walk unaccompanied in our neighborhood. I'm just curious if that had been considered when you came up with some of these safety features. I guess, like, what I'm thinking of is like how kids don't hear fire alarms sometimes. So they go to the schools and they do special trainings, or like sometimes you get fire alarms that have different sounds that might wake a child, like just children. And when they're alone, like what they perceive and what they hear is different than if they're walking with a parent or a caregiver. So I'm just wondering if that was considered at all.
I consider safety for all pedestrians. I don't distinguish between, children of a certain age or whether they're accompanied or not. I look at pedestrian safety as an absolute, not to segregate or discriminate against any one particular group. So the recommendations I've made are for pedestrians of all age, accompanied or unaccompanied. If children are of too young an age and they're able to successfully cross a public street, then I think they can cross a driveway. I don't think there's a difference between activity at a driveway and at a public street intersection. I will say that our access points are designed to have pedestrians have right of way, meaning the sidewalk is at a uniform elevation, and that a pedestrian doesn't feel like they're stepping into a vehicular driveway. They feel as though they're remaining on the sidewalk. So that gives them, I'd say, an even enhanced means of ingress and egress as opposed to Forest Ave or Woodland, any of the other intersections. So these recommendations are to enhance the safety that I believe is already met. We're just trying to be responsive to these concerns that have been raised, particularly for children. And
okay, so can I just go ahead? Sorry.
We're open to suggestions if planters aren't desired and grass is too low. Look, there's fences, there's bollards, there's a whole. The concept is to provide enough of a barrier to keep pedestrians on the sidewalk where they should be. So in whatever form it takes, we're open to that suggestion.
Okay, so you're saying that a child who's capable of crossing a public street with a crossing guard's help should be equally it should be equally capable of crossing a driveway that goes two ways without a crossing guard.
Correct.
Okay, I don't see how, I mean, you're talking about with or without a help of an adult. I'm not talking about like segregation or discrimination. I'm just talking about a child and the way that they see the world, and even at the level that they see the world. And, you know, you can't really compare crossing a public street as they do daily with a crossing guard in the morning and then in the afternoon to crossing an entryway or an exit without a crossing guard or without an adult's help.
Yeah, there are other driveways along Chatham Road. Each one does not have a crossing guard.
I know. I have 4 children who've gone to that school, but the people who live here, who you know live in all of these homes, know those times of day. They know to be careful, and it's sort of, I mean, that's part of like, I mean, you're adding like all of these new residents all at once, and so the learning curve is not like one family at a time moving into a house. It's like all of a sudden all these people and these kids also
to that. I really can't offer any more other than we've responded to the board's concerns and have enhanced the driveway for better safety. A crossing guard is not on the table, as Mr. Inglesino said. I don't believe in solving problems that don't exist. And I think the design and the consideration that's been put into it by all of the professionals, including architecture, civil, and traffic, this is a safe design, and I'll stick by that. I really can't offer any more. And
okay, so let me just get back to my original question is, did you consider that the foot traffic is unaccompanied minors when you did your study? Unaccompanied specifically.
Foot traffic, period, whether they're minors or seniors. There's no distinction in any design treatise that I've seen that distinguishes among different age groups. And again, there are other driveways. There's a gas station right across the street on Woodland. There are numerous other locations where these children, if they are so unaccompanied, have been deemed that is an acceptable practice for them. And so these driveways are not anything unique or different compared to those other locations.
Okay, so you consider an 8-year-old pedestrian the same as a 30-year-old pedestrian, is what you're saying?
Yes, they have to be safe for all. Yes.
Okay, I think that's very clear. That's very clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members of the public for Mr. Dean regarding his testimony tonight? Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dean, for responding to the questions. And we turn it back to Mr. Inglesino.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Chair, our next witness is Michael Tobia.
Hello, everyone. Michael Tobia. My audio okay?
Yep, your audio is okay. We're going to have you sworn in because you have not been sworn in yet.
Mr. Fishman will swear you in, Mr. Tobia. Mr. Fishman?
So, do you swear from the testimony you're about to give in tonight's Zoom hearing to be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Just state your name for the record, please.
Sure. Michael Tobia, Tobia. I'm the applicant's planning consultant.
Mr. Tobia, can you please provide the board with your professional educational background and any licenses that you possess?
Sure. I'm a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. I've been practicing now for 39 years after securing a bachelor degree and a master's degree in the field of urban planning, first from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and then from Rutgers University. Finished my schoolwork in 1981 and have been practicing continuously in the field since that time, with appearances now before over 200 planning boards and zoning boards and governing bodies, as well as appearances in municipal and state courts.
Okay, Madam Chair, we would respectfully submit Mr. Tobia as an expert in this application with respect to planning.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. We will hear you as an expert planner.
Okay,
Thank you,
Copia,
Madam
please,
Chair. Thank you.
provide some testimony with regard to the planning aspects of this application and kindly address any variances that are being requested.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a brief description of zoning, board members and members of the public, and then we're going to talk about variances, and then we're going to talk about the rooftop deck. Madam Chair, I figure I'm good for maybe 20 minutes, maybe a little more, as we do our time management. As you all know, we're in a site called the RMFAH zone, and that stands for Residential Multifamily Affordable Housing. This is a zone that was created by Ordinance 2542-19, so it's a couple of years old. It was part of a court settlement to address the housing needs of affordable housing needs of the town, and it was part of a long settlement with the town. The ordinance contemplates both the medical office use on this site, as well as the apartment use, as well as the structured parking use. Mr. Buzak earlier mentioned kind of the vital parts of this zoning that cannot be changed by variance actions of this board, including use, density, and height. And indeed, all those major metrics of the ordinance are met by this applicant. Secondary controls, such as affordable housing, setbacks, parking, circulation are also met. This is nearly a fully conforming application. There are two variances we want to pull your coattails to. One is, and I'm going to go to screen share if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so now you should be seeing a rendering. Does everybody see that? Slide 11.
Yeah.
Previously marked into evidence as A31, Mr. Buzak, on January 20th. And we'll just put this up for a second to understand. This is the proposal. There are two variants, I said. One relates to the so-called step back or terrace of a unit, a single unit out of the 62 units. And the other relates to a concern raised in Mr. Phillips' report about the adequacy of parking on the Summit Medical site, now extant, while the so-called phase one portion of the project is being built. We're going to go to slide 14 for a second. And I thought we would talk about the rooftop or the step back issue off the south side of the building. So we are now on previously marked exhibit A33. A33 is slide 14 of Dave Minnow's previous submission. This is the southern end of the building. To the right would be Woodland Road, that's off the slide. To the top, also off the slide, is Chatham Road. The far southern tip of the building, as you can see in this illustration, has a small terrace. This is a unit that measures 1,710 square feet in area. So I'm calling it unit 1710 for our discussion. The only variance that's required here is that your ordinance requires 3 particular terraces to be a minimum of 10 feet wide and 30 feet long. In this case, we have a terrace that is 10 feet wide, but it is only 20 feet long. So we're 10 feet shy of the zoning requirement. The variance in this case is a really technical one because the building in this area at 1710 is only 20 feet wide. Therefore, we cannot provide the required 30 feet on a building that only has 20 feet of wall space. It's what we under the statute call a hardship and practical difficulty. To extend this terrace 10 extra feet, could have it dangling out in the midair, either to the east or west of the proposed terrace. That would look awful, would make no sense at all. But the purpose of the terrace was to reduce massing on the top floor of the building. Instead of having another wall here going all the way up to the rooftop, we have an open air recreational element. To the right of Exhibit A33 is another one of the terraces required by ordinance. This adjoins a unit that measures 1,310 square feet in size. So I'm calling this unit 1310. In this case, this is a compliant terrace, 10 feet wide, 38 feet deep. It's actually a little bit larger than what's required by ordinance. I'll go back to slide 11, also known as Exhibit A31, and I'll explain what we tried to do here with 3 terraces. The concern way back when we were talking about zoning was to reduce building massing at the southern end of the building. That's unit 1710 where we need a variance. At the midpoint of the building, that's unit 1310. And then we have another unit up near Chatham Road known as unit 1995, which also has a compliant 10-foot by 30, in this case 35-foot terrace. These 3 chops, if you will, of heated living space were designed to make the building look somewhat smaller for folks moving north on Woodland. The fact that we do not provide the 30-foot width on the terrace does not mean for the southerly unit that we have failed to meet the intent and purpose of the ordinance. Indeed, we still reduce massing with the first part of the building you would see driving up Woodland. This is a variance that can be granted under what we call the C1 statute, which says it's practical difficulty to make this any wider. Okay, so that's our first variance. It's a pretty easy one to understand, especially recognizing the other 2 terraces on these 3 sensitive corners are compliant. I'm going to go now to slide 2, also previously marked, Mr. Buzak, as A21. Okay, A21. Unchanged since it was presented by Mr. Minow. And I'm going to zoom in here, folks, to the lower left of this exhibit, which shows phase 1 construction, okay, which is the right half of the exhibit, including the 10,000 square feet of proposed Summit Medical site. And it's going to show the existing Summit Medical site, which is the southernmost portion of the overall property. One of the key design considerations in the whole project was that Summit Medical would not have one single day of business interruption while this project was being built. That means we had to stage the project into 2 stages, which have broadly been known as stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 1 is shown in this illustration on the lower left of A21. However, once phase 1 begins, the Summit Medical property, which will remain in operation, only will have 36 parking stalls. And if you see my pointer, I'm showing you the general location of those stalls. 50 stalls are required by ordinance. So the parking variance in this request, A, is temporary, and B, it's a delta of 14 stalls, meaning we're 14 stalls light. 36 would be provided, 50 would be required. Note that the existing Summit Medical building is also 10,000 square feet, roughly the same as, exactly the same as what's being built on phase 1. This is a temporary shortfall of parking. Phase one, we know now from talking to our construction experts at the applicant's office, will take 18 months to build. So it's that 18-month window where we'll be 14 parking stalls short of what's required. We're going to go now, Mr. Inglesino, to a new exhibit that will need to be identified and marked. This is the valet parking plan dated March 19th of this year. And Mr. Buzak, I saw, was it 845 we were up to?
We're up to 840. This will be 846.
That's what I thought. Okay. So I'm paying attention, Mr. Buzak. I'm paying attention.
You are.
Thank you. 846 then, I just identified. This was something that I conjured up with the applicant. And I'm going to zoom in on the main body of this exhibit, which shows a valet parking plan. The valet parking plan, if you look at the shaded stalls in the center of the existing Summit Medical Building, show 24 parking stalls. The perimeter parking stalls now extant on the property, number 26. So if you add 26 to the 24, we achieve the 50 parking stalls that would be necessary to make the existing building parking compliant during the 18 months while the new building is being built. The valet parking plan, which will be subject to town staff review, right now we contemplate will be occupied by valet professionals, managed by them, and generally board members and members of the public, we're going to do two things. Use this core level of tandem parking or stacked parking for patients. We're going to use the perimeter of the lot for employees. We also anticipate using the 6 stalls nearest Woodland for employees as well. This means the valet parkers will be allowed to put patient parking in the tandem parking area. They'll probably be picking up the car right in the throat of the driveway, allowing patients to enter the building on Woodland, and then they'll manage the parking. This will be done, and it has been approved by Summit Medical already, during the hours of operation when Summit Medical knows they're busy. If you've been to Summit Medical over the years, you'll know sometimes they're busy, sometimes they're not busy. During lighter hours, the parking under the valet plan will not be needed, and we will rely on the existing surface parking that tallies 36 stalls. Let me go back to Exhibit A21 and explain a little something more about our parking plan. Aside from what we think is a good fix for Summit Medical with valet parking, we also want to let you know something about construction phasing. And phase one, which is more properly called stage one, will consist of a couple of things. One, the construction of 3 levels of deck parking. One will be 2 levels below grade, one will be 1 level below grade, and one will be at street level along Chatham Road at the same level as the medical office space. Phase one will consist of 155 parking stalls. Okay, that's 36 more stalls than are required for the apartments and the office space that will be built on phase one, or 30% more required than your ordinance. Phase one, because it's what we call podium construction, will require the construction of all 3 parking levels before any work can be done on the medical office space or on the apartments above. This means we will have at our disposal for construction parking for contractors and storage all 3 levels of parking. 155 stalls available for our construction workers. It will obviate and eliminate the need for any possible on-street parking along Chatham Road or along Woodland Road. Okay, remember again, because Summit Medical cannot have even 1 day of disturbance for their patients and doctors, there's going to come a day roughly 18 months away when the new building will be all fixed up, fully occupied, fully furnished, and the existing building is going to have a move day where their employees are going to go to the new building already furnished. It's probably going to happen over the weekend when incidentals can be moved in also. Phase 1 will be finished for the medical office space. Phase 2 will then commence, meaning the new building will come down, the existing parking will be removed, and the parking variance, this temporary technical parking variance, will be eliminated. It's also worth noting, once phase 2 is built and the project's completed, even then, we're going to have more parking than we need. 192 stalls will be provided with 173 required, or roughly 19 stalls and 10% in excess of the parking requirement in the ordinance that governs. Okay, so that's our parking plan. I would point out, I don't know how many of you know the applicant, but they are an extremely sophisticated group that builds these types of projects all the time, and they know how to manage their parking. Many of the employees coming to the site during construction will not be coming in single cars anyway, more likely in vans holding 5 or 6 people each. Okay, so now I want to go to slide 34. I'm sorry, slide 15. Slide 15, Mr. Buzak, previously marked as A34. Okay, A34, sorry about that. And we want to talk for a minute about the so-called rooftop deck. The rooftop deck is an amenity found at any one of a number of more higher end apartment buildings. It gives folks the opportunity to have an outdoor amenity. I think in this building, only 5 units actually have private balconies. So this was designed to give folks an outdoor amenity, some open space, and some passive recreational opportunities. Basically, it's a sitting area with some plant material, lounges, and umbrellas. So it's passive. I believe the question has arisen as to whether a rooftop deck is a permitted accessory use in the zone, the RMFAH zone. Okay. Planners look to a couple of basic tests to determine what is accessory and what is not. And first of all, there's 2 fundamental things you need to know. There are principal uses in most zoning ordinances and accessory uses. The principal use here is the apartment building, okay, and the medical space. Accessory uses include everything necessary to support the main use, such as the parking or sidewalks or lampposts or fence, trash receptacles, and so on. The legal standard that we look at is a 2-pronged test. One, it says, does the accessory use bear a close resemblance to the main use? In this case, is the rooftop deck closely related to the proposed apartments? And the second test is an accessory use customary. Do you normally find it at other properties with similar principal uses? In each case here, the rooftop deck, in my opinion, is customary. It is incidental. It's important to point out this rooftop deck is proposed only for residents of the apartments and their guests. It will not be used by Summit Medical. It will not be rented out to private parties. You're not going to have weddings up here. You're not going to have anyone use this but the people who live in the building, and therefore it's classically called incidental to the apartment use. It's also customary. And indeed, any of you can go online or go apartment shopping, as I've done a few times in the recent past, and find that other buildings have rooftop amenities. There are projects that we know of nearby in towns such as South Orange, Maplewood, and Morristown that have decks just like this. They are all basically the same in that they're passive recreational space only. The fact that this ordinance, RMFAH, does not specifically permit a rooftop deck does not mean it's prohibited. Indeed, our law on the subject says it's really impossible to anticipate every single accessory use. There are just so many of them and they vary. Indeed, in this zone, the zoning ordinance doesn't, for this site, permit things such as sidewalks, driveways, gyms, club rooms, even lampposts as accessory uses. And yet we know they're all very typical and customary uses for an apartment building. To take it a step further, and a final step, we also know if we read the Millburn zoning ordinance, not the ordinance created for this site, but just the general ordinance, accessory uses are defined locally as customary and incidental, just like I shared with you. In the nearby R6 zone, just to the south of us, where all the single family homeowners are located, many accessory uses are called out, but it's interesting, even in those zones, things like decks and patios are not even called accessory to a single family home. That's because it's just assumed and recognized as customary and incidental. So I think what you have here is a permitted use as an accessory use. It is limited strictly for residential use of the people who will be renting the units. It's passive. We know if we go to slide 17, also known as A36, that we have stationed this rooftop deck toward the middle of the subject building, 390 to 396 feet away from the nearest property lines of our neighbors on Oak Terrace. So we have a lot of elbow room from the rooftop deck to these nearby homes for some separation. I want to talk very quickly about the negative criteria required in.
Mr. Tovey, before you do that, are there any other constraints that the applicant has agreed to with regard to the rooftop decks in terms of hours of operation and the like?
Yes, Mr. Inglesino, I was just going to get there. Sorry. So first of all, on the rooftop deck, specific limits of use will be stipulated to by this applicant. One, as I said, residents and guests only. Two, no usage by Summit Medical, whether doctors or patients or otherwise. No outside parties, no outside rentals. We're agreeing to a 10 p.m. curfew on the rooftop deck. That means no one uses it after 10 o'clock. We're going to firm up that curfew by installing automatic locking doors to the rooftop deck that lock at 10 p.m. We're going to further stipulate to an automatic shut off of the fire pit up there at 10 p.m. also. So we have a lot of protections in the plan, Mr. Inglesino. I did want to point out just a couple of other things as I wrap up. One, the parking variance for what we're estimating to be 18 months in duration is indeed addressed by now, valet parking. So we're going to have enough parking on the site. It is short-term. It's fixed by valet parking. It will eliminate itself once phase 1 is built. Then Summit Medical will have their 50 spaces in the new building reserved for the use of medical office space. And not only will they have enough parking, the applicant, as I indicated, will exceed the required parking both at phase 1 and at phase 2. The step back requirement that we talked about meets the spirit of the ordinance. It does provide 10 feet of building step back. The other units do provide the required amount. We simply didn't build an apartment wide enough in that area to get to 30 feet. As I indicated before, the applicant meets so many of the zoning requirements that it's impossible for me to conclude this is a substantial impairment of your zoning ordinance. I've pointed out the use is permitted, the affordable housing requirement is met, which is 12 units, by the way. Setbacks are met, height is met all around the whole building, parking is exceeded. You heard from Mr. Minow on building design. That's all met. So I've been working on this now for 4 to 5 years with the applicant. We think it's a superb asset. Rent levels in this building, by the way, are going to go from $4,000 to $7,000 a month. It will address a fairly larger apartment type, which is mostly untapped in the area, and will speak directly to what we call the empty nesters or the downsiders who want to stay in town, near their families, near their institutions, and yet have a simpler lifestyle. So we view this really as a win-win for everybody. That's it, Mr. Inglesino.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tobia. Madam Chair, I send it back to you for questions.
Thank you. If I can ask, although we may ask you to share your screen again, if you can, for the time being, unshare, just so I can see more of my fellow planning board members. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Who may have questions for Mr. Tobia on his testimony. Gaston.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Question, you had said that the garage, and I think in phase 1 is going to be built first. Some of it's going to be used for storage of materials. It will also be used for lay down assembly and all this other stuff. And how much space is actually going to take up? How is there a percentage estimated?
So remember, we're at the zoning stage. We haven't done our construction drawings yet or any of the scheduling. But as I told you, we have 155 parking spaces in that phase. Okay. Broadly speaking, we expect even during the busiest phase that we might have 30 employees there. And not all of those folks are coming in their own vehicles. So you can imagine how much extra space is left over for other uses such as storage. And suffice it to say, we'll have a lot of elbow room in this building for storage and parking.
Okay. And will the parking area be used for receipt of materials or anything like that?
It probably will, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Jorge, go ahead.
Yeah, first I have a comment or a question for Mr. Busak, and it was related to construction phases. You said that it's not part of the planning board to ask about the construction phases, the transportation of the bringing materials to the site. But if you see in our zoning ordinance, the article DRC 509.1, it mentions that part of the EIS is a description of the development specifying what is to be done during construction and operation. So I think as part of the planning board, we should review that. Unless I misunderstood something there.
No, your point is well taken. The EIS requirements are broad in terms of the impacts on the municipality. And I think the testimony I think Mr. Lanza Fama was the one who testified as to the environmental impact statement. So okay. I'm not sure. You can certainly ask the question, Mr. Tobia, but I'm not sure he's the right witness. But I stand corrected.
Okay.
You are correct.
So my question actually for Mr. Tobia was something totally different. At the end of your presentation, you said this is a win-win. My question to you is, this is a win-win for whom? It's a win-win for the community, except for the affordable housing, because that's the only thing that I keep hearing here in every presentation. You need affordable housing, we provide it. I just remind you that you are providing only 12 affordable housing, and our town needs many more than 12. So I want, as a planner, you tell us what is the win-win for our community having this building.
So, okay.
Without mentioning the affordable housing, because we know that.
Right. So, the other thing happening here, as I indicated, is 50 units of apartments. These would be for what we call the market rate units, not the affordable units, in a marketplace that we have consistently identified as severely underserved in most communities along the train line, okay? And what we're finding, because of the aging of the baby boom demographic, is we have a seemingly endless number of people who become empty nesters, suddenly look at their homes and say, wow, I have 3 bedrooms I'm not using anymore. I have a whole family room I don't use anymore, and it's time to downsize, or as some of us say, to right size. So the 50 units, while they're not affordable, are units that are meeting a different need. And that's what I meant when I said win-win. It's not just for lower income households. Moreover, when we first started looking at this site, it also took on a transit village function. Okay, it's right on top of the train station. It's right next to medical office. It's right next to a neighborhood retail space. It's right next to a post office, and it becomes a real opportunity for housing in a walking district opportunity. So it's a win at both levels. You also know this site has not been the best looking site in Millburn Township. And so beautification of the property is another feather in the cap of the application.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Jorge, that answered your question. Dan, go ahead.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Mr. Tobia, for your testimony tonight. You testified on the duration of the first phase, but I did not hear anything about the second phase. How long would the second phase of construction take?
We're figuring the same schedule. Is that Mr. Bear? I can't quite read that.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So same basic schedule. What we're estimating for each of these phases, a 9-month phase to build the podium where the underground parking would be, and 9 months then to stick build up with the office and apartment use. So that will happen on phase 2, same way it happens on phase 1.
So the expectation over the entire duration of the project is approximately 3 years of construction, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I just want to go back to what Jorge said because he's absolutely correct. Our ordinance states specifically that that we have the right to understand construction impacts. But even moreover, if you go down to section 509.5 under the same section, it states that a description of the steps to be taken to avoid or minimize adverse environmental impacts during construction and operation, including map schedules and other explanatory data which clarify and explain these steps. Now, I wanted to ask these questions way back when Mr. Lazafama was testifying, but Mr. Lazafama did not understand the construction duration, so therefore I could not ask these questions. My question would have been that why is your EIS deficient and does not clarify what those construction impacts are and what that mitigation is to address those?
Well,
So excuse me, John, just let me finish. Yep. Okay, and I understand Mr. Lazafama is here, and I had asked again for Mr. Lazafama to attend, and so therefore I cannot ask that question of Mr. Lazafama tonight because he's not here. But I have read the EIS and I find no information in there. Therefore, I hope, and we can talk about this later, that there is some way to, I'm going to pick up on what Mr. Pop had discussed earlier as well. There is some way to designate specific construction routes that are safe and secure as part of some developer's agreement. While we will not designate those as the planning board, we do have the right to understand that mitigation will occur. So over 36 months of construction, that is probably a duration that this town is not used to. This is a larger development. Therefore, I would expect that as part of some agreement, if this application is approved, that there would be some designation working with the experts in the township. And hopefully we can get the applicant to agree to something like that. I'm sorry, Mr. Inglesino, please.
No, that's okay, Mr. Mayor. If I may, I guess I respect your question and the sentiment. I would, however, take issue with the fact that the EIS is deficient. As Mr. Buzak indicated, I think correctly so, the EIS is an extremely broad document that puts different emphasis on different things depending upon the circumstance. If the EIS was deficient, then our application would not have been deemed complete because we would not have completed the information necessary for the application to be considered by the board. The fact that the application was deemed complete with the information that was submitted on the EIS, I respectfully submit means that the EIS was sufficient as determined by the board and its professionals for purposes of the application. We understand that this is a large project for Millburn. We also understand, and I think your professionals understand, although I don't speak for them, that we are going to have a developer's agreement. There are sort of on the ground, there are construction issues and logistics and the like to work out. The applicant is obviously committed to doing that and working with your engineer and other professionals, police department, et cetera, to coordinate all of those things. Some of which will evolve over time, I'm sure, through circumstances that arise. But I would submit respectfully that the board is part of the settlement, is a signatory, approved the settlement agreement, which is the subject of this application. And so the board, I would submit respectfully, has made a determination that this project in this location is suitable for this location, which would mean not only the project itself, but the construction of the project. But that having been said, we totally understand that there are a whole host of construction issues, logistical issues, and the like that have to be worked out, which we will do in meetings and in coordination with your folks, township employees and departments who are going to be working with us to develop and manage these plans for the construction. All of that will be a requirement of the applicant as part of the developer's agreement, which I'm sure you will condition this application upon. That is the execution of the developer's agreement. And that developer's agreement will be negotiated between the governing body and the applicant. And that is where those issues will be addressed in detail. That is just not frankly appropriate for the board, in large part because it involves other disciplines of the municipal government to work with us to develop. Your engineering, your police department, emergency services, et cetera. We're going to be working hand in hand with those folks to address much more specifically these types of issues.
Well, thank you, Mr. Inglesito. And I certainly agree with you. In no way was I making the case that this board was the body to do that, to make those decisions with respect to construction and to be working with the applicant. And I did say that the engineer and other services in town would be the appropriate bodies that would negotiate with you, such as police and fire. So my case was the fact that I believe that as part of that developer's agreement, which it sounds like you have agreed to, should take into consideration the construction traffic. And like I said before, from what I just heard, it's my understanding that that would be part of the developer's agreement worked out with the appropriate bodies in the township.
Absolutely, Mr. Barry, you're 100% correct.
We're good. We're good. Thank you, Mr. Inglesito.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, the only thing I do want to clarify, in fairness to the professionals of the board who review these applications, when submissions are made, there's a checklist, and this is required under the MLUL in order to deem an application complete. There's a checklist of items that need to be provided, as the board knows. The substance, in many cases, of these reports, a stormwater report, environmental impact statement, the substance of it is not the issue as to whether or not the application is complete. And I'm not suggesting this EIS was deficient or is deficient. My point is that those evaluations are not made in order to deem an application complete. Any aspect of those become subject matter of the board, and that's why I did stand corrected, as was pointed out, as I pointed out earlier. But I don't want to leave the impression that because the application is deemed complete, that every substantive item within the various reports have been reviewed and analyzed, because frankly, even if they were deficient, we couldn't deem an application incomplete. So long as the document is there and ostensibly complies. I mean, I understand if you have blank papers in between it, it's a different story, but that's not what we're talking about here. I just wanted to make that clear for the board.
Mr. Buzak, thank you. Mr. Buzak, thank you. And I still stand by my original suggestion that it is deficient. But my point, I think my questions were answered, and I think that I am fine with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions for Mr. Tabaya regarding his testimony? Sanjeev, go ahead.
Mr. Tobia, hi, how are you?
Good. And you?
Pretty good, thank you. Thank you for your testimony. And I heard about 20 minutes, as you said, in that 20 minutes, a little over 10 minutes, you actually tried to convince on the roof deck that is customary and it's an accessorial usage. I read the ordinance. It is not mentioned in the ordinance, and yes, it says whatever goes with the accessorial with that kind of build out. Similarly, I've seen all the community members talking against the roof deck. And also I've heard all the community member talking about loading and unloading. That is also, according to you, parking and whatever the other parts of the building is, also the accessorial charge, accessorial usage. I've not heard you talking about that part, and I've seen a lot of buildings where I've seen the other way around, less of a roof deck, but more of a loading and unloading within the premises. And that part I've asked several questions in the past, along with the other community members. But all I hear is one indent for a truck that will suffice for the 62 units that we are making here. Right across you, there is Short Hills Village, which is probably, I think, around 14 units per acre. That is where density is. Other than that, the other density in the area is probably 6 or less per acre. This unit or this property is over 40 per acre or more than 40. Within that kind of density, we are looking at using the public access to do, and worst case scenario, I can still think that somebody's getting a UPS package, throwing it in and leaving. This take hours and hours of unloading. And when there was a gentleman, traffic engineer, Mr. Dean, he said customary is 15% moving and move outs, or not moving and move outs, move-in happens within a year. And that got doubled because he was just talking at move-ins. Even if it's 15%, there's move out as well, same amount at least. So it's 30% traffic going in and out. Now, I understand there is not enough parking the size that the truck cannot go in, but I also see that you go 2 levels down on the parking. So I would really want you guys to look at this, because this is not part of the ordinance. And similarly, the roof deck is not part of the ordinance. So if one needs to be seen, the other needs to be seen as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, first of all, thank you for that. I did want to point out, and you reminded me now, the ordinance does not specifically say rooftop decks are permitted, okay? But what the ordinance says, importantly, is that other uses, customarily and incidental to the apartment use, shall be permitted. It's an open-ended remark. In fact, at one point, your ordinance says there are certain accessory uses permitted, and it goes on to say, including but not limited to, okay? Building flexibility into the ordinance for things, as I mentioned, not only about the rooftop deck, but about the fitness center proposed, or a community room, or other accessory uses. This is normally the way these ordinances are written, because you cannot contemplate every accessory use for every zone, okay? My strong feeling on this is rooftops are not only a customary accessory use. For a building like this, they're vital, okay? Given the nature of the use, the size of the units, the price point, it's just an absolutely customary use. We've talked internally, and I do a lot of work for this applicant about loading, move-in days and moving out. And this internally with our leasing office is very closely monitored, okay? It is scheduled by particular tenant for a particular time, and it's limited. Usually what we do is a maximum of 2 move-ins on a given day. meaning 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. And there are restrictions applied even to things like size of trucks. Okay, so that is something we get to 2 years from now when we start leasing up, but it is very closely monitored by us as landlords.
Thank you.
Is that what you remark?
Sorry, Sandeep, repeat that. I think I talked over you.
Yeah, no, is that the remark? Is that it? Is that your answer?
Yes, yes. Unless you have any other questions, yeah.
Right. So as you said, you strongly feel that rooftop is the vital accessory. Again, it's not explained or added in the ordinance. It's your opinion versus others' opinion. So that is one. Secondly, last time a traffic engineer mentioned, when I asked the same question on move in and move out, he mentioned the move in and move out will happen on the weekends. And if I correctly remember, before that, it was talked about that there will be building people in the building or office, whoever is going to take care of the building will be there during the weekday 9 to 5. So that part, again, I don't understand. And even if there are 2 move in and move outs and they take hours, I'm still saying that you're using public access right of way to do your work or people who lives in that premises. And if it's 1 unit or 6 unit per acre, like the density in the area is, or even the thing across your building, Short Hills Village, I don't believe they use the public road for move in and move out. So again, this is accessorial. If you are thinking on one, you should be thinking on the other as well. And I want to be fair as a member of this board to be equally judging what you're talking on one, judging the same way on the others. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Tobia.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Other members having questions? I see Mark, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask a question that I asked the last time that I do not believe I received an adequate answer to. And I'm referring, specifically to the lack of commitment by the developer. And this is a question for Mr. Tobia to commit to a LEED minimum standard. And the reason I asked that question, I was told that it's too expensive, but the firm that Mr. Minnow stated that it was too expensive has done dozens and dozens of these projects, and it addresses and deals with specifically the health and well-being of our community. And I'm sure you know all the metrics tied to energy consumption, energy savings, and the return on investment that you would receive, by basically doing a LEED silver building. And in light of the president's $2 trillion proposal, I find it outrageous. And you're in essence hurting the town of Millburn, the township, by not considering this. And we just reviewed another major development similar to yours downtown, and they committed to a LEED silver standard. So I'm mystified.
Mark, let's just phrase the question for him.
Yeah, how do you respond to that? Why will you not commit to a LEED silver minimum standard? And we've got ordinances that basically support LEED. I believe it was during the very visionary reign of Mayor Bear, where basically the township commits to a LEED silver standard for our own buildings, township buildings.
So, Mr. Massel, if I may, because
I asked Mr. Tobias, please.
I understand, but Mr. Tobia wasn't present for Mr. Minnow's testimony, so he cannot answer for Mr. Minnow, but I would like to refresh what Mr. Minnow testified to. what he said was a few things. Number one, there is no obligation to get a LEED certification for this building. There's no obligation in the ordinance. Number one. Number two, he testified that there are many elements of LEED certification that are going into this project. That is not what was cost prohibitive. What was cost prohibitive was the cost of actually obtaining the LEED certification. And his testimony was it cost about $200,000 just to obtain the certification. So I think that I think it's unfair to say that there aren't significant elements of LEED in the project. What he testified to was the cost of the certification. So that is what the answer was to the question. I would also add respectfully, and this would also be for Mr. Buzak at a later date, is that, since this is an inclusionary project, to impose that kind of cost on this project that is not provided for as part of the settlement agreement or as part of the ordinance would, in our opinion, be ultra vires, and it would be cost generative. It would impose a cost on the developer that would not be appropriate under the circumstances of this application. That said, though, Mr. Minow did point out again all of the aspects of LEED certification that are going into the building, so that you have a building that has many of the LEED aspects. But again, the cost of getting the certification itself is what the objection was. So,
Mr. Inglesino, are you aware of all the tax credits and deductions that you can basically write off for doing a LEED building? There are dozens and dozens, and there are a lot more on the books now that the president has just proposed, and you will basically make that up in less than 2 years. And I've got a tremendous amount of documentation about that, and I mentioned it to Mr. Minow, and he didn't adequately respond to that. But it's absolutely, I find it to be insulting that you're not even considering this. We just, reviewed a proposal by another developer, and they were so pleased to do that, and they've got the same conditions that you do. It's perhaps a little smaller of a site, but you're going to reap those benefits by potential rent increases to those that can afford it. So my question is, why aren't you doing it? And you basically said it's too expensive, and I didn't hear if you're aware of all the tax credits and deductions.
Again, I'm just a lawyer, as they say, but I think that we've addressed the question in the best way that we possibly can.
I asked you a question. Are you aware of all the tax deductions and credits that you get on both the federal and state level for constructing LEED?
If I might, Mr. Maxwell, we
It's a
can't
yes
really
or no
question-
answer.
We can't question the attorney. He's not testifying, although we every once in a while attorneys do testify. We try to keep them to the straight and narrow. So I think I understand what you're saying. I think the point's been made, but and perhaps Mr. Inglesino wanted to answer the question, but I don't think it's an appropriate question to ask.
Well, I did, because I asked it of Mr. Tabaya, and he basically interjected.
Okay, well, again, look, Mr. Tobia, if you have an answer to the question, I'll ask that you answer it, but if you don't, that's it. It wasn't in your testimony, so let me pass it to you, sir.
And just so you all know, it wasn't in my testimony, Mr. Buzak, because it's almost always the project architect that does address it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you all. So we are now past 10:30, which is when I turn into a pumpkin. But that said, I know we still have opportunity, and I see, another board member has his hand raised, and I know that members of the public will have questions for Mr. Tabaya. That said, I do believe my preferred move now is to have us carry to a future meeting, because I have a feeling that will take us through quite a while. And so that means that we also haven't gotten yet to the public testimony part. And I know there have been, some members of the public who have been patiently listening and waiting for their turn, and that will have to come at our subsequent meeting. I hope with all hopes that we can cover things at that next meeting. So that said, Eileen, I don't know that we went through the exercise which we had done last time of identifying what of our current scheduled meetings may be open, so that we can pose some dates to the applicant for carrying.
Well, we have a meeting actually April 7th, next week. Is that next week?
Yes.
Which we don't have any applications on. The only thing I have scheduled for that meeting is we're doing an ordinance amendment that you're gonna look at. I don't know if you want to. I do have an application that will probably be scheduled for the April 21st meeting. So I don't know if the applicant or you would like to continue this on April 7th.
I think that would be my preference. Just confirming, Ed, I know there were some dates with which you had conflicts, and same for Paul.
Well, for me, the 7th works, the 21st doesn't work.
Okay.
So the 7th works. I don't know about.
And Paul, I think if you were able to ask your questions, I don't know if you had further questions, or if you do have questions, Mr. Chabot.
Yeah, I have the opposite conflict of Ed, which happened the last time, which is why I couldn't meet the special meeting. I'm good the 21st, but not next week, the 7th. I do have questions.
Well, you know what? Hold on. I stand corrected, because if it's April 7th, the agenda would have already had to have been. Can I redo the agenda? I know. I mean, it's.
Oh, because
yes,
you're within.
you can redo the agenda.
Okay.
I mean, legally.
Okay. It's posted, but we could add something.
And then Ed, if Paul is not able to attend, can he submit his questions or submit a report or no?
Well, certainly he can pass questions on to us as the board or board members or me, and I can pass those on. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to evaluate the answers.
I understand.
And that's the difficulty with that.
Okay.
Madam
For
Chair.
Mr. Inglesino, does the 7th work for you?
Yes, both myself and Mr. Tobia can be available for the 7th.
The only other thing I would ask, Madam Chair, is perhaps that if we don't finish up on the 7th, that Mr. Inglesino agree to bring Mr. Tobia back for the 21st, when Mr. Phillips could be here. But that, I'm sorry, that's going to cause some other issues. So let me withdraw that suggestion.
Can I raise one other issue, whether you schedule this for me or not? I do have questions of the witness, but I also don't want to catch Mr. Inglesino, put him in a difficult situation or catch him off guard. There were a number of questions that I raised, 2 or 3, at prior hearings of Mr. Lanzafama, and he indicated that he would get back to us on that, and that hasn't occurred yet. And I don't want to, raise these issues at the minute, the applicant closes and the public has given their comment, because I don't think it's fair to the applicant, but there are 2 or 3 open issues as well.
Can you provide those to us, Mr. Phillips?
I can do it now, or I can, any which way if you want to do it now, I can do it now.
Sure, now it's fine.
So there was an issue that was raised in my report. And I had questioned Mr. Lanzafama that there's a requirement that where the 3rd level of the parking garage is exposed to view, there is some requirements with regard to landscaping treatments to buffer it. And this would be John facing the Arboretum. And I think we all recognize that there's not much that can be done within the 1 to 2 foot setback. But Mr. Lanzafama volunteered that he would look into exploring I think he characterized it as vines or wall creepers at the base to cover that third level of the garage to sort of soften that look. I'd also asked for an illustrative photo so the board could see what it looked like. The second thing, I asked him if the applicant would be willing to do additional foundation plantings on the south side of the building, sort of carrying it around the garage entrance, sort of wrapping it around. Because in the plans that were submitted, it was just along the Woodland Road frontage. So if that also can be addressed. And the last question, and I apologize if this was covered by Mr. Minow, but I had asked Mr. Lanza-Farmer as to why a portion of the roof courtyard, and that's the phase 1 courtyard, actually extends into the phase 2 area. I didn't understand how that worked. And does that mean that the phase 1 courtyard is not usable until phase 2 is completed? I don't know whether Mr. Minow addressed that. I was unavailable for the last meeting. So those, John, would be the 3 additional issues.
Okay, I appreciate that, Paul.
No problem.
Thank you. That's Evan. Thank you, Paul. I'm glad you're able to share. My preference is to carry this to next week, to April 7th, just to allow the conversation to continue and hopefully the application to move to a conclusion, potentially. So, Eileen, you would be able to, based on the question you just asked of Ed, you would be able to make that change.
Yes, I'll do that tomorrow.
And then we would be announcing that we can carry this application with no required further notice to April 7th, 2021 with the same Zoom link. Like took me a second there. With the same Zoom link login information at 7:30 p.m. as tonight.
Correct.
Great. So we can do that. Do I need a motion for that?
No, I think that we're okay.
Okay.
It's a regular meeting, so we need no other special notice.
Wonderful. Thank you all. That said, we will continue next week, and we will continue with the board questions and then move right to public questions for Mr. Tobia. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the board.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to close tonight's meeting? I will move to close tonight's meeting.
I second that. I second that.
Thanks. Thanks, Jorge. Okay, so tonight's meeting is finished at 10:44 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Night.
Have a good night.
Good night.